In a vast desert under a clear sky, bandit-like warriors scan their surroundings in tense silence. One senses danger and gathers light in his palm. Before they can act, a powerful slash cuts through the air, instantly wiping out the front line. Shock freezes the survivors. One attacker lunges, but the blonde-haired fighter counters, striking him down in a single blow. He raises his weapon again and finishes the fallen man without hesitation. Exhaustion finally catches up. Blood runs down his face as his grip loosens, yet he remains standing. The remaining warriors curse him as a monster and rush in together, sensing weakness. His breathing turns ragged, blood filling his mouth as pain overwhelms him. Another impact sends him flying. As enemies press in, his body reacts instinctively. Pain sharpens his awareness, and system notifications activate hidden traits tied to endurance, weapon mastery, and control. Suspended in midair and surrounded, he roars and releases everything he has. The moment signals a shift. This is real, and there is no escape. The scene cuts to a cluttered room filled with empty bottles and cans. He sits alone before his computer late at night. The screen reads game over. Another loss. He curses the game, yet keeps playing. His routine is revealed. Months earlier, he quit his job, cut off the world, and shut himself inside. Gaming becomes his only existence. Years pass without change. 5 years spent on a single game leave his life stagnant. The login screen appears again. Pangea, famous for its brutal difficulty, promises any wish to those who clear it. No one ever does. Players quit as bosses prove unbeatable. Companions betray each other, NPCs hunt bounty players, and death deletes everything, forcing full restarts. Left alone, he suspects the game was never meant to be cleared. The system deletes his character due to death, then awards an enormous amount of soul points. He freezes as the total reaches 1.66 million, gained from rare items his character carried. He learns that soul points transfer between characters and can be invested into talents, with a cap of 10,000 per talent. Remembering a past Swordmaster character, he realizes these points are enough to invest across nearly everything. Normally, he would choose magic for safety. This time, he selects random without hesitation. Calmly accepting failure, he commits to enjoying the game one last time. The scene shifts to a quiet cafe. She apologizes while handing him a drink, then explains she cannot stay with someone without a future. Marriage is on her mind. Comparing him to her friend's stable partners, she makes her decision clear. He says nothing. She leaves, wishing him well. 3 months earlier, after 5 years together, the breakup leaves him stunned. Anger follows. He quits his dead-end job, isolates himself, and sinks fully into gaming. Back in the present, he hovers over the random option again. He steadies himself, rejects self-pity, and confirms the choice. The system rapidly consumes his soul points as notifications flood the screen. A hidden piece activates. Another message appears, congratulating him and stating he has been invited to Pangea. The wording feels unfamiliar. He realizes the game is showing him something he has never seen before. Before he can react, the screen erupts in violent motion. A powerful force pulls him forward as the world distorts. A deafening roar follows, and a furious presence curses the world itself. Crushing pressure slams into his body from every direction. He screams, clutching his head as pain overwhelms him. In the chaos, he realizes a voice is speaking directly inside his mind. This is no longer a game. The force throws him back. He crashes onto the floor of his room, gasping as red system messages appear on the screen, declaring his arrival in Pangea. His consciousness fades. He awakens in a harsh desert environment. Voices curse and order him to stand as armed men surround him. A threat follows, collapse again, and he will be fed to the High Dragon. Heavy footsteps and massive claws confirm the creature's presence. Chains bind his wrists as captives are forced forward. When he finally sees the towering dragon, fear tightens his chest. A guard strikes him from behind, forcing him to move. He collapses again, coughing as boots march past. Dragging himself up, he realizes survival is his only option. Looking around, he sees exhausted captives under guard. The Hydreigon matches the monster from Pangea. The rocky desert ahead feels familiar. Quietly, he calls up the status window. A blue holographic screen appears. The system is real. His stats are abnormal. Every base stat set to 12, along with 13 active hidden traits. Warnings tied to the world itself hint that Pangea is unstable. The realization hits him. He hasn't logged in. He has inner Pangenia. Tension spreads. Guards panic and turn toward the horizon. A massive force approaches. The Desert Queen's army advances, breaking the non-aggression pact. Chaos erupts as orders are shouted. A powerful woman steps forward, silencing the battlefield. He recognizes her instantly, the Snake Princess. A system alert appears. Main quest generated. Objective, survive. Failure means death in both worlds. Arrows rain down. People scream and scatter. He moves through the chaos, dodging as bodies fall around him. Blood splashes his face. A hidden trait activates, reducing exhaustion and sharpening judgment. Seeing a fallen sword, he realizes staying still means death. He sprints forward, grabs the weapon, and turns to face an attack. Blue energy surges as he counters, sending an enemy flying. He lands low, sword glowing. Another hidden trait activates. His focus sharpens as enemies rush in. An attacker swings. He dodges cleanly and strikes back with precise timing, dropping the enemy in a single blow. Energy shifts again. Multiple weapons materialize in the air. He tracks the next attack perfectly, steps into the opening, and cuts the enemy down with one decisive strike. He stands alone, breathing steadily, weapon lowered. The surrounding enemies hesitate, staring at him in shock, calling him a monster. The battle is far from over. System messages confirm his weapon proficiencies have increased. He steadies his breathing and checks his status, realizing his proficiency has already reached level 6. He understands that surviving this long was only possible because of his hidden trait. Looking around, he sees hundreds of enemies still surrounding him and knows this strength will not last. Standing alone, he realizes survival is still uncertain. Elsewhere, a report confirms that the Demon Realm expedition has failed. The Snake Princess is warned that if their city's absence becomes known, the Central Continent will blame them. She is ordered to erase all evidence that Fiselmer never sent troops, including eliminating every remaining survivor. In return, her curse will be lifted. She accepts the order without hesitation. Later, she surveys the battlefield. A wounded man reports that one survivor remains. At a distance, the last survivor stands, barely upright and leaning on his sword. The system restores his health and mana, removes fatigue, and raises his level to 2. He regains his footing and orders the approaching enemies to move aside. The survivors realize the princess has arrived. He looks up and recognizes her. The system identifies her as Isabella von Dergen, level 8, with unreadable stats due to insufficient understanding. He immediately realizes the overwhelming gap. From level 7 onward, strength becomes absolute. Standing against her puts him at a complete disadvantage, made worse by her unreadable abilities and curse-bound restriction. She steps forward and declares his execution. He remains silent, recalling how he always chose the hardest challenges and adapted under pressure. Without hesitation, he steps forward. She attacks instantly, but he remains calm as power gathers. As she closes in, she freezes when he steps in her range without fear. He declares himself a star bearer, stating he can lift the queen's curse. Her reaction confirms the authority behind his words. The system explains that Star Bearer is an NPC-exclusive role, attainable only by players who surpass the maximum level. Removing the curse requires a Star Bearer's blessing. She lowers her head and listens. The system confirms Isabella von Dergen is a character he himself created. He explains she was meant to guide players but was bound by the queen's curse to the starting zone. After a moment, she asks his name. He answers, and the system confirms it has been set. She decides to spare him, warning that if he is lying, she will kill him. He is escorted away as an honored guest. The system finalizes the quest, confirming its completion. His performance is judged as record-breaking, triggering constellation reactions and upgraded rewards. He receives a broken golden scale, the soul of the Hydragon, and a named sword. Exhausted and injured, he collapses, realizing he survived. The system records his achievement in the Hall of Fame. Night falls, ending the trial. Later, he rests in a grand room and reviews his rewards, noting the rarity of the Hydragon soul. The system explains the broken golden scale allows temporary synchronization between Pangenia and reality. As attendants approach, he instructs them to wash only his feet, maintaining composure to avoid suspicion. A status window interrupts, warning that the boundary between Pangenia and reality is weakening. Another screen shows him ranked first in the Hall of Fame. A new logout feature unlocks, with a warning that his character will remain vulnerable during logout. He pauses, reacting when the term star-bearer appears again, turning toward her in quiet confusion. A sudden realization hits him. The players who vanished during character creation may not have disappeared at all, but were summoned into this world just like him. He realizes he can leave. The attendants try to stop him, citing the princess's orders, but he cuts them off, claiming he must communicate with the stars or lose his power. He tells them to inform the princess and leaves. Alone, he admits his excuse barely worked and feels relief at finally moving forward. He logs out without hesitation. The system warns him to keep his character safe and confirms that death there means death in reality. Logout completes. He opens his eyes in the real world. Outside, the city is already burning. Explosions echo, people flee, and something massive moves through the flames. An emergency alert appears on his phone. A giant claw smashes into the building, proving the monsters have crossed into reality. He is thrown back as destruction spreads outside. Elsewhere, people gather before glowing system screens, forced into a new reality where survival depends on combat. A man with glasses panics as he realizes it is real. The scene snaps back to his room. He tries to convince himself it was a dream, until he notices an unfamiliar item beside his keyboard. Picking it up, he understands everything was real. He rushes to check the game, only to find the homepage gone. Panic sets in. Outside, monsters rampage through the streets. Emergency calls flood in. These creatures look exactly like those from Pangea. As the strange item falls to the floor, a system screen appears, warning that the boundary between worlds is collapsing. Realizing this item may be his only chance, he activates it. Warm light spreads through his hands. Game rewards manifest in reality. The fragment synchronizes Pangea with the real world for a limited time. Knowing ordinary humans cannot fight, he still activates it. A powerful presence appears behind him as the system confirms synchronization. Outside, chaos continues. A mother flees with her child, is crushed by debris, and begs another woman to save her daughter. As a monster looms over her, she accepts her fate. At the last moment, a man with glowing eyes appears and destroys the monster instantly. Another monster attacks. A massive presence rises in the distance. A 9-headed dragon reveals itself. The man steps forward calmly, positioning himself between the survivors and the dragon, ordering everyone to stay still. The woman clutches the child, staring in disbelief as she realizes someone capable of fighting these monsters has appeared. As she catches her breath, doubt surfaces, but the chaos around her makes it impossible to dismiss as a dream. The child breaks free and runs back toward her injured mother as people flee in all directions. Destruction spreads everywhere. Monsters are rampaging across the world simultaneously, pushing civilization toward collapse. Alongside them, powerful individuals appear, cutting down monsters with ease and rallying terrified crowds. The world rapidly shifts into something new. Reality and Pangea begin merging, and fragments of the broken golden scale become the measure of power. Rankings update for the first time in 2 years, revealing massive gaps. At the top stands a name Randolph, suspected to be Phantom, the player who once led the deepest NPC expedition before his strongest character fell. It becomes clear that summoned players now cross into reality with their Pangea forms intact. His past expedition failures, betrayals, and interference begin to make sense. Logging out is no longer an escape. Survival now depends on becoming stronger, faster than others. Later, a woman on a throne asks if he has finished communicating with the stars and confirms she has come to fulfill her promise. She sets one condition. He must take her to the sanctuary. She explains that a star exists there, and a system window confirms a class can be obtained inside. The ruined city stands silent under moonlight as blood-stained corridors show a completed massacre. Hours earlier, he eliminates the remaining guards and confronts Isabella, demanding entry to the sanctuary. He explains that after surviving the first main quest, obtaining a class is the next step, and that a star hidden there can lift her curse. Though she warns him of the risks and that entry is forbidden, she eventually allows it. They enter the sanctuary. The system confirms a subquest, warns of extreme danger, venom, magic, and a guardian dragon. He admits this place was originally inaccessible to beginners, and that subquest rewards are irrelevant. What matters is obtaining a class through main quest 2. Dark energy stirs. The sanctuary responds. The atmosphere grows heavy as something hidden awakens. Isabella senses danger and warns of a trap ahead. He steps forward calmly, admits he missed it, and asks if she is afraid. She mocks him, but he insists they move forward and lifts her onto his back. Ignoring her protests, he charges ahead, triggering the trap. The ground collapses and they plunge into the abyss. Mid-fall, a hidden trait activates, granting him special vision. He confirms that an invisible path exists and that it is the real way forward. She panics inwardly, unable to understand how he can sense a path she cannot perceive. When she questions his confidence, he brushes it aside, noting her fear of heights and calmly stating that carrying her is not an issue for him. Irritated by his relaxed attitude, she snaps back. As they move forward, an odd sense of familiarity settles in, like reconnecting with someone long known. She asks if they have met before, but he remains silent, observing her reaction. As they ascend glowing stairs, she insists they have never shared the same space before and that he has never truly seen her. Blue energy surges as the surroundings distort and a barrier spreads across the area. He explains that it is a domain barrier that conceals the domain from anyone who strays off the correct path, confirming they are moving properly. He recalls that the next stage should appear here. The ground splits open, revealing a dark cavity with a red core. The earth shakes as stone figures rise, followed by a massive guardian whose chest glows red. He identifies it as a high-grade golem and notes that contact at his level would mean instant death. While he casually asks if her condition has improved, she tells him to stay focused. The golem charges and swings its massive arm. She stands her ground. Golden restraints bind the arm mid-swing, and it shatters in an explosion. She moves through the debris, strikes the exposed core, and destroys the guardian. He observes calmly, noting her precise execution despite her level. As rubble falls, the system offers him the Golem Maker class, counting her kill as his own. He reviews it, recognizes its value, and rejects it without hesitation, confirming someone else here can grant the class he wants. The purple miasma thickens as Isabella stops. A massive mountain wrapped in ominous energy appears. A system message states that the old king, master of the mountain and guardian of the nameless star, has been angered. He realizes their true destination is ahead. A massive presence descends. The dragon-like keeper does not attack immediately. He notes its calm nature and reassures her. Suddenly, a shockwave knocks her down. The serpent reveals itself as the sanctuary's challenger, declaring that proof of worth is required. He realizes it has mistaken him as the challenger and that the battle has begun without his intent. The pressure intensifies as the serpent declares that failure means death. Memories surface of clearing this sanctuary before, never facing this entity. He realizes something has changed. The guardian is revealed as Dramath, the ancient king empowered by star energy. Previously, he survived because he was overwhelmingly stronger. Now he is not. Isabella is struck down and struggles to move, weakened by the sanctuary's miasma. Doubt sets in as she questions her decision to trust him. She calls out for Dramath to stop. The guardian halts, shocked by something unexpected. He steps forward and addresses the keeper by name, declaring himself its master and invoking Wilhelm. Silence follows as Dramath coils and acknowledges Wilhelm's return, then erupts in laughter. It mocks him, stating Wilhelm was flawless and died completely after the Demon Realm expedition. He orders Dramath to honor their contract. Shock spreads as the keeper realizes he knows of an agreement meant to be unknown. The contract is revealed. Whoever obtains the star gains the keeper's true name and mastery, and breaking it means death. He explains the rules still apply and that Randolph's body shields him from the contract's curse. Dramath calls him insignificant, realizing the contract is being exploited. Jin Wu calmly responds that the keeper should lead the way if it wants answers. The serpent mocks him, warning that the star will burn him away, then agrees to guide them so the star itself may judge him. The massive serpent moves ahead toward the mountain. Wilhelm follows as the atmosphere grows heavier and darker, signaling their approach to the star's domain. The chamber grows silent and tense, as if something is waiting. She stares ahead in shock, then searches the dark space, unable to find anything resembling a star. The serpent points to the altar, revealing a skull set within a magic formation, and confirms that this skull itself is the star. Wilhelm freezes as he realizes it is Li's face. The serpent explains that Li, one of Pangenia's twin goddesses, died and her body was divided into 32 fragments scattered across the continent. These fragments became the foundations used during creation and are what people call stars. Holding the skull, Wilhelm understands the truth. As he approaches, intense heat surrounds him. The serpent mocks him, claiming the star will burn him away and that he was never acknowledged. Wilhelm recalls that a star only kills players who bypass the Guardian through exploits, which he did not do. He also remembers that acquiring a star without a class grants a special job. As the skull begins to crack, he focuses not on survival, but on whether he can obtain the class he wants. Light engulfs him as the star reacts. Its power is absorbed into his body, his mana converting into sacred energy. System notifications confirm new effects as star possession activates. The power settles without rejection, and the system confirms his success. Wilhelm has obtained the star successor class. She watches in disbelief as he turns back calmly, unaffected. He asks what she intends to do now that her curse can be lifted. She states her goal is to leave the desert and return to the Durjan bloodline. He offers to bless her so she can leave, on the condition that she serves him for 1 year. After that, he will grant her freedom and help her find her family. She hesitates, then kneels and accepts. He acknowledges her choice and confirms the hierarchy, stating that the master of the star is now her master as well. Dramit hesitates, then submits. Wilhelm orders the Guardian to lower its head, asserting authority. A system calculation follows, showing an unprecedented score and upgraded rewards. The impact of the results leaves observers stunned. The scene shifts. In the real world, players gather in a quiet cafe, discussing whether Randolph is truly Phantom. They speculate about his return, his ranking potential, and how to track him, settling on using the secret auction hall as bait. Before any plan is finalized, the system updates. The Hall of Fame refreshes, placing Randolph first with a massive score gap. Shock spreads as they question what class could produce such results. Back in Pangaea, the Sanctuary Exploration subquest is completed. Wilhelm escapes the desert while finishing exploration, gaining experience and leveling up to 3. As a star successor, leveling is slower, but his overall stats rise significantly. He reviews his rewards, noting several items far beyond his level, including a shadow cloak that grants invisibility. Suddenly, the sanctuary shakes. The Guardian senses intruders. Isabella identifies them as the Queen's pursuit squad. Wilhelm notes that fighting directly would be inefficient and decides retreat is the better option. While Dramit holds them back, they run. He explains that the Guardian cannot leave the sanctuary and that their only escape is the warp gate at the desert's edge. With her curse lifted, Isabella can pass through, but the gate requires time to activate. They arrive before the warp gate and wait as its activation begins. She grows uneasy as he explains that once the gate activates, they will be out of the desert. He confirms it, but adds they must endure until activation, which will take roughly half a day. With nowhere to hide and pursuit squads likely tracking them, delaying the enemy inside the sanctuary is their only advantage. He explains that during this time, he must communicate with the star and cannot remain logged in, as he needs to verify what is happening in reality. She asks directly if she can trust him. He assures her that he will protect her. She stays behind as he prepares to leave. A system warning appears about logging out in a safe location, followed by confirmation. He wakes in a real world on his bed, still adjusting to the sensation of returning to his own body. Checking the news, he finds no disaster reports and concludes that monsters have not yet appeared. He realizes the two worlds are slowly merging and decides he must return periodically to monitor the situation. His phone rings. It is Kim Sion. At a cafe, she scolds him over the phone about money and past promises. He suggests talking in person, but she ends the call, irritated. Later, they meet. She speaks casually, hinting at regret and asking if he missed her. He remains distant and distracted. When she presses him, he stands to leave. She grows angry, but he calmly asks if her new boyfriend knows she is meeting him. She freezes. He points out her inconsistency and walks away. Another man suddenly confronts him, escalating into violence. The attack is stopped instantly as he counters with overwhelming control. The man is subdued, and the woman nearby stares at him in shock. He realizes his strength, in reality, has changed. When the attacker charges again, he ends it with a single strike. Police arrive. Kim Hannah, a reporter from CK Broadcasting, intervenes, questioning why the helper is being treated as the aggressor. Recognized by the officers, she defuses the situation. She gives him her card, mentioning her coverage of Dimension Warriors. Kim Hannah pressures the police officers by implying that she could report the entire incident publicly. The officers immediately realize the situation could become troublesome, especially after recognizing that CK is a major broadcast station. At the same time, people in the crowd begin recognizing her. They recall seeing her recently on YouTube and television after she saved a child from a monster, confirming that the reporter in front of them is indeed Kim Hannah. Realizing that the situation could attract public attention, the police decide not to escalate things further. They allow the reporter to accompany the complainant directly, and the matter is settled as they leave the area. Afterward, Kim Hannah thanks Park Hyun-myung for what happened earlier. He brushes it off casually. She then gives him her business card and explains that she covers cases related to Dimension Warriors. Hyun-myung is confused by the term, so she briefly explains that it refers to the mysterious individuals who appeared during the day monsters invaded from another dimension and defeated them. These individuals are widely referred to as Dimension Warriors. He internally connects the term with players. He also finds it interesting that people rarely mention Pangea directly, and instead prefer the explanation of an invasion from another dimension, since that sounds more believable than the idea of a game becoming reality. Kim Hannah then politely asks if she can have his business card as well. At that moment, Kim Seoyeon, Hyun-myung's ex-girlfriend, suddenly runs over in a panic. She grabs his arm while anxiously checking if he is hurt. Seeing the interaction, Kim Hannah assumes that Seoyeon might be his girlfriend. Hyun-myung immediately pulls his hand away and clarifies that she is not. He also mentions that he unfortunately does not have a business card. Instead, Kim Hannah asks for his phone number. He agrees and enters his number into her phone. While this happens, Seoyeon watches the situation in visible shock. When Kim Hannah checks the saved contact, she notices his name, Park Hyun-myung, and compliments it. Before leaving, she suggests meeting the next day if he is free, offering coffee or dinner and saying she will treat him. Hyun-myung accepts the invitation, and the two agree to meet. Kim Hannah then leaves the area. Seoyeon remains standing there, stunned by what she just witnessed. She cannot believe how easily Hyun-myung interacted with another woman right in front of her, and her thoughts quickly turn into anger directed at him. As Kim Hannah walks through the streets afterward, her phone begins to ring. She answers the call and hears a colleague from the station jokingly introducing himself with an exaggerated title. She corrects him, reminding him of her name and asking him not to call himself that. The caller then informs her that the chief has gone on a business trip and left a task for her. Confused, she asks what the task is. He explains that the station wants her to secure an interview with Gracia. The name immediately surprises her. Gracia is widely known as the hero who saved America, and she cannot understand why someone that famous would specifically request her. The caller admits he does not know the reason either, but confirms that the so-called superhero personally asked to meet her and even plans to come to Korea. The scene then shifts back to the sanctuary. Isabella has already eliminated several soldiers while protecting Hyun-myung. After a short while, more soldiers arrive at the location. Despite the growing number of enemies, Isabella remains standing calmly in place. One of the soldiers calls out to Isabella, addressing her as the Snake Princess and delivering the Queen's command. They demand that she return and surrender the slave standing behind her, promising that everything will be forgiven if she complies quietly. Instead of responding with hesitation, Isabella simply raises her sword and dismisses the demand as foolish. The soldiers immediately brand her a traitor and begin advancing toward her with the intent to execute her. Despite the approaching threat, Isabella does not move and continues standing in place. At that moment, a bright blue light suddenly appears behind her as a portal gate opens. The soldiers stop and stare in disbelief at the sudden phenomenon. Shortly after, Park Hyun-myung regains consciousness and approaches from behind Isabella. He acknowledges that she managed to hold out until he returned. Isabella then asks whether he finished communicating with the star, and he confirms that he did. While the soldiers hesitate, one of them shouts at the others to stop waiting and carry out the execution. Hyun-myung calmly raises his hand and states that since Isabella kept her promise to protect him, he will also keep his own promise. A golden light begins to gather in his palm. When he clenches his fist, the gathered energy triggers a powerful explosion. Using the exclusive skill of the star, known as Star Scratch, he releases all of his stored star force as blazing flames. The attack spreads outward and engulfs the soldiers from every direction, burning them instantly as they cry out in pain. After the attack, Hyun-myung declares that the moment of liberation has arrived and that it should be celebrated. Isabella witnesses the display of power and becomes deeply shocked, recognizing it as the power of a star seer. Hyun-myung then turns to her and tells her that if she wishes to return even now, he will not stop her. Isabella hesitates briefly as she considers the choice. After a moment of thought, she decides that she will not return and instead chooses to follow him. With that decision made, she steps through the portal gate with him. Soon after, a notification informs Hyunmi-young that Isabella's limit curse has been nullified by the star's blessing. The system also indicates that from the Kaltzman Desert there are 12 cities available for warping, and the central continent city, known as Arcana, has been selected. The war process then begins. The scene shifts as they arrive in Arcana, known as the Golden City. The city operates entirely on material wealth, and anyone without enormous amounts of gold would normally not even consider entering it. Hyunmi-young and Isabella walk into the city together. Isabella observes the surroundings and is struck by how luxurious everything appears. Hyunmi-young explains that in this place money truly solves everything, and that their first priority is to obtain enough gold for basic living. Isabella then reveals that she brought a pouch containing 300 gold. However, Hyunmi-young explains that the amount is barely enough to cover food and a place to stay for a single night in a city like Arcana. The information shocks her, since in the desert the same amount of gold could buy 10 slaves and would normally be considered an enormous sum. She struggles to understand how prices could be so drastically different from the Kaltzman Desert and begins wondering what they should do next. Hyunmi-young calmly tells her that there is nothing to worry about because money is practically lying around nearby. Confused, Isabella asks what he means. Instead of answering directly, he points toward a casino in the city. Realizing his intention, she becomes surprised but stays silent. Hyunmi-young then stands confidently in front of the casino entrance, assuring her that there is no need to worry because he considers himself a very lucky person. Arcana is known as the Golden City, also called the City of Pleasure. In Pangenia, where every major city functions like its own kingdom, this particular city operates under a single rule. Money decides everything. The place where most of that money eventually gathers is the famous Hudson Casino. The casino building shines with bright lights, and a large crowd waits outside in a long line to enter. Guards stand at the entrance controlling access. When Hyunmi-young and Isabella reach the gate, the guard explains that entry requires a deposit of 10,000 gold. The amount immediately shocks Isabella. She quietly reminds Hyunmi-young that after washing up and buying clothes, they only have about 100 gold remaining. Hyunmi-young calmly explains that the money they had was never going to be enough for the casino anyway, and that buying proper clothes was necessary. Their delay begins to irritate the people waiting in line behind them. Some complain that if they cannot pay the deposit, they should move aside instead of wasting everyone's time. The guard also asks them to step aside if they cannot provide the required amount. Instead of leaving, Hyunmi-young presents a glowing ruby and offers it as collateral in place of the deposit. The guard examines the gem carefully. He realizes that it is the tear of the Fairy Queen, an extremely rare item formed from the first crystallized tear of the Fairy Queen. The talisman allows equipment to break through its limit cap, and even if the enhanced equipment is destroyed, the tear itself remains. However, to use it again, the user must complete a resurrection quest connected to the item. Recognizing the value of such a treasure, the guard becomes visibly shaken and immediately changes his attitude, respectfully guiding them inside and directing them to the VIP area. As Hyunmi-young and Isabella walk through the entrance, the staff members bow politely as they pass. While walking inside, Isabella asks what exactly he handed over earlier. Hyunmi-young explains that it was the tear of the Fairy Queen, a talisman he obtained as a reward from the sanctuary, and that it is worth at least 1,000,000 gold. Isabella becomes uneasy about casually handing over something so valuable, but Hyunmi-young remains calm, saying that he simply needs to win enough money to recover the deposit. Sometime later, Hyunmi-young is seen playing roulette. The casino staff spins the roulette wheel, and the ball repeatedly lands on the number he chooses. The crowd begins reacting with shock as he continues winning again and again. People watching cannot believe the results, noticing that he started with only 250 gold and has already increased his winnings to more than 1.4 million gold. While sitting at the table, Hyunmi-young quietly reflects that the golden blessing trait is extremely useful when money is involved. Meanwhile, Isabella excitedly celebrates the sudden wealth, but Hyunmi-young immediately clarifies that the winnings belong to him alone. Not long after, a staff member approaches him respectfully and explains that although he may keep all of his winnings, he is no longer allowed to enter Hudson Casino. Hyunmi-young is confused by how quickly this decision was made. The staff member explains that other guests have started copying his bets and are also walking away with large piles of chips, creating serious problems for the casino. Because of this, they ask him to leave. Isabella becomes visibly irritated by the decision but Hyunmyeong accepts it calmly. However, before leaving, he asks to speak with the casino's owner. The guard refuses the request and tells him to leave quietly. Hyunmyeong responds calmly, explaining that he is not desperate to meet the owner but believes the owner will want to meet him, so they should simply deliver the message. The scene then shifts to the office of the casino's owner. Inside, the owner carefully examines the ruby using his own abilities to verify its authenticity. After confirming that it is genuine, he becomes deeply surprised. He reflects on how rare the tear of the Fairy Queen truly is. Items like this are usually carried only by the Fairy Queen's knights, who are extremely difficult to find. Defeating one of them normally requires several powerful fighters of high level, making the acquisition of such an item incredibly difficult. He has searched everywhere for one without success, yet now one has appeared in his casino unexpectedly. While he is still thinking about this, a guard arrives outside the office and informs him that the man who left the talisman as collateral wishes to meet him and insists that the owner would want to see him. The owner pauses to consider this information for a moment. After thinking it over, he calmly decides to allow the meeting and instructs the guard to bring the man in, suggesting that they should share a cup of tea. Soon after, Hyunmyeong enters the office and sits on the sofa while Isabella remains standing beside him. The casino owner observes the two of them carefully. As he studies Hyunmyeong, he internally questions how someone who appears so ordinary could possess something as rare as the tear of the Fairy Queen. The owner then begins the conversation by mentioning that he heard Hyunmyeong claim the owner would want to meet him, and he asks what exactly was meant by that statement. Hyunmyeong calmly explains that there was nothing particularly deep about the remark. He simply believed the owner would want to meet him because of the talisman left as collateral, assuming that the owner would have an interest in it. The statement surprises the owner, but he quickly regains his composure. He then admits that he does indeed collect rare talismans as a hobby and confirms that he was planning to request a meeting in order to purchase the talisman Hyunmyeong left behind. Hyunmyeong calmly says that he is willing to sell the talisman if the price is right. Hearing this, the casino owner quickly proposes an offer of 2 million gold, describing it as a generous price. The amount shocks Isabella, who cannot believe that a single talisman could be worth such an enormous sum. However, Hyunmyeong immediately counters the offer by naming a much higher price, 20 million gold. The owner is taken aback by the demand and points out that such an amount could easily buy a mansion in Central Arcana. From his perspective, even a rare item like the Tear of the Fairy Queen is still mainly used for refining equipment, so he questions whether it could truly be worth that much. Hyunmyeong calmly explains that he himself does not necessarily believe it is worth that price, but the owner certainly does. The owner tries to dismiss the idea by saying he cannot spend such a large amount on something that is merely part of his personal collection. Hyunmyeong then reveals the real reason the owner wants the item. He explains that the talisman is not simply a collectible for him, but a necessary tool if he wishes to enter the city council. The minimum requirement for joining the council is reaching level 10, but reaching that level normally requires personal combat ability. For someone like the casino owner, who is not a combatant, overcoming that barrier would be nearly impossible. The Tear of the Fairy Queen provides a way around this problem because it removes the minimum stat requirements on equipment. By using equipment far above his own level, the owner could compensate for his lack of combat strength. Hyunmyeong then exposes the deeper motivation behind the plan. The reason a casino owner is trying to enter the city council is to gain recognition from the family of his fiancée, Serengeti. This revelation shocks the owner completely. While watching his reaction, Hyunmyeong reflects internally on what he knows about Serengeti. She is the only daughter of Marquis Weiser of the Balan Kingdom and is known as the Snow White Knight. In the past, she led 500 knights and joined the grand expedition into the demon realm. During that expedition, she sacrificed both of her legs to the Demon King in order to save Hyunmyeong. At the time, Hyunmyeong believed her actions were simply another unexpected event in the game, since Pangenia had still been nothing more than a game to him then. However, after Wilhelm died and he arrived in this world for real, he began reconsidering those memories. Once he realized that the characters he thought were NPCs might actually be players, something Serengeti once said started to feel far more meaningful. He recalls a moment from the past when he obtained an item called Serengeti's necklace. The necklace contained a photograph of Serengeti together with her fiancé, Hudson. This confused him because in the original character settings he knew, Serengeti never had a fiancé. It meant that someone had influenced her story beyond the original data. The only explanation that made sense to him was that Hudson was also a player who had become part of this world, just like him. The scene returns to the present as Hudson stares at Hyun-mi-young in shock, unable to understand how someone could know such a secret when he had never told anyone about it. While observing him, Hyun-mi-young realizes that Hudson likely arrived in this world long before he did, which means he could possess valuable information about Pangenia and the players within it. Because of that, Hyun-mi-young decides to push the conversation further. Instead of directly explaining how he knows these things, he claims that the information came from the star. Hearing this, Hudson reacts with surprise and wonders if Hyun-mi-young is some kind of saint. Hyun-mi-young does not insist that he be believed. Instead, he offers Hudson another option. He says that he can help him achieve what he wants without taking his money, but only if Hudson accepts one simple condition. The condition is that Hudson must tell the star the story of his life. After hearing it, Hyun-mi-young will decide whether or not to help him. However, every word must be truthful because the star favors honesty. Hudson pauses to consider the proposal. At the same time, Hyun-mi-young thinks about the risks involved. Saints are extremely rare and not someone people encounter casually. Revealing personal information in Pangenia is extremely dangerous because there are NPCs known as hunters who specialize in hunting down players. These hunters consider players to be sinners and execute them immediately once exposed. Many players have already died because of them, and their methods of approaching targets vary so much that constant caution is the only defense. Because of this danger, most players hide their identities carefully, since revealing personal information can be equivalent to suicide. Hyun-mi-young himself has no intention of revealing his true identity either. However, he was confident that Hudson would eventually accept the offer. For Hudson, Serengeti is far more than just another NPC. After thinking for a while, Hudson looks at the necklace connected to Serengeti and finally agrees to tell his life story. He begins by explaining that everything he wants to achieve is tied to Serengeti, so the story must begin with her. He describes her as a brave knight who joined the Demon Realm expedition led by the 8 heroes. This immediately confuses Hyun-mi-young. According to what he knows, the expedition should have been led entirely by Wilhelm. Hudson, however, explains that while Wilhelm is the most famous figure, the widely known story is that the expedition was carried out by 8 heroes together, and that it ultimately failed because of internal conflict between them. Hearing this version of events makes Hyun-mi-young question what kind of story Hudson has heard. He asks whether Hudson even knows who these 8 heroes are. Hudson confirms that they are extremely famous and begins naming them, mentioning that one of them is Gracia, known as the strongest hero after Wilhelm. The scene then shifts away from the conversation to a room where a blonde-haired boy is watching the news. The broadcast reports on a recent disaster in downtown Seoul, where a giant monster called the Giant Mantis appeared and killed dozens of citizens. The report describes how the chaos suddenly stopped when a man riding on top of the monster descended from the sky, leaving everyone stunned. While the boy watches the report, a girl approaches him and informs him that she has arranged his meeting schedule with the Korean reporter Kim Hannah. The boy, revealed to be Gracia, thanks her. The girl cautiously asks whether there is a specific reason he insists on traveling to Korea in person, especially during such dangerous times. She suggests that the reporter could simply be invited to the United States instead, and mentions that the government hopes he will remain there in case another monster attack occurs. However, Gracia explains that there is something he must personally confirm. He has a strong feeling that the man shown in the report might be the friend he has been searching for. Inside the casino office, Hudson continues explaining the story to Hyun-mi-young. He describes Serengeti as a brave knight who took part in the Great Demon World expedition led by the 8 heroes. The statement immediately confuses Hyun-mi-young, because according to what he knows, the expedition should have been led by Wilhelm alone. Hudson seems puzzled by the reaction and explains that while Wilhelm is indeed the most famous figure, the expedition is commonly known as a mission carried out by 8 heroes together. According to the stories widely told, the expedition ultimately failed because of internal conflict between those 8 heroes. Hearing this version of events leaves Hyun-mi-young deeply surprised. In his mind, the idea of the expedition collapsing due to infighting sounds completely absurd. The scene later shifts to a restaurant. Hyun-mi-young sits at the table, staring awkwardly at the food in front of him. Kim Hannah notices his distracted behavior and asks whether the meal does not suit his taste. He explains that the food is not the problem and that he is simply tired because something happened the previous day. While sitting there, he reflects on the previous night. After asking Hudson to tell his life story, Hudson ended up talking all night while crying and rambling about his past. Although the conversation was exhausting, Hyun-mi-young did manage to gather information about the 8 heroes. Because he stayed logged in all night, he ended up arriving 10 minutes late for his appointment with Kim Hannah. Looking around the restaurant, he also wonders if the place is too expensive and feels slightly uncomfortable eating without paying. Kim Hannah reminds him that he helped her by getting rid of the stalker before, and she believes that treating him to a meal like this is still not enough to repay that help. Hyun-mi-young insists that what he did was simply something he should have done, but Kim Hannah sees it differently and considers it an act of genuine bravery. While they continue talking, Kim Hannah suddenly notices something unusual and looks toward the back of the restaurant. When Hyun-mi-young asks what she saw, she points out a woman sitting in the distance who appears to be glancing at their table repeatedly. The woman is the same person who was with him before. Hyun-mi-young turns to look and immediately realizes that it is Kim Seo-yeon. Sitting with her is a man who appears familiar from Seo-yeon's social media. He remembers that the man's name is likely Jin Wu. Kim Hannah quietly suggests moving to another table if the situation makes him uncomfortable. Hyun-mi-young tells her not to worry and explains that he has no relationship with Seo-yeon anymore. Before the conversation can continue, someone suddenly calls out Hyun-mi-young's name. The blue-haired man standing behind him turns out to be young Jin Wu. Jin Wu immediately begins accusing Hyun-mi-young of following Seo-yeon and claims that even after the breakup, he kept pestering her and is now stalking her. Hyun-mi-young is confused by the accusation. Jin Wu continues speaking aggressively, claiming that he heard Hyun-mi-young once cried and begged Seo-yeon while dragging her to a cafe after the breakup. As Hyun-mi-young listens, he realizes where the story likely came from. Jin Wu continues threatening him and warns that if he follows Seo-yeon again, he will kill him. Kim Hannah, who has been quietly listening until this point, can no longer tolerate the accusations and stands up, angrily questioning why he is making such ridiculous claims. Jin Wu notices her and begins insulting her as well, implying that she is only acting as a rented girlfriend. The comment immediately angers Kim Hannah even more. Jin Wu continues mocking her by asking how much she is being paid and offering to pay her double to stay quiet. Kim Hannah firmly responds that she personally made the reservation and invited Hyun-mi-young because he helped her. She criticizes Jin Wu for believing he can say whatever he wants just because he has money. In response, Jin Wu throws cash at her face and arrogantly asks if the amount is still not enough, demanding that they leave. Furious at the humiliation, Kim Hannah slaps him across the face and calls him insane. The slap enrages Jin Wu, who prepares to retaliate. As he swings his hand toward Kim Hannah, Hyun-mi-young intervenes immediately by pulling his leg out from under him, causing him to fall to the floor. Hyun-mi-young then warns him to stop and points out that he is not exactly innocent either. Jin Wu becomes even angrier, but before he can react properly, Hyun-mi-young grabs him and slams his face against the ground while telling him to stop the nonsense. Jin Wu struggles on the floor, unable to get up. He is shocked by the overwhelming strength in Hyun-mi-young's grip and begins wondering how someone like him could possibly possess such power. Nearby, Seo-yeon becomes embarrassed by the situation and angrily tells Jin Wu to get up. Meanwhile, Hyun-mi-young continues holding him down and calmly suggests that they should take the argument outside instead of causing a scene in the restaurant. Jin Wu feels humiliated that someone he considers worthless is overpowering him in front of Seo-yeon, and his anger intensifies. Suddenly, he pulls out a golden scale and activates it. A bright blue light spreads throughout the restaurant. The sudden glow shocks everyone nearby, and another customer quickly realizes what it means, recognizing him as a Dimension Warrior. In the next moment, Jin Wu grabs Hyun-mi-young by the neck and lifts him into the air with the strength granted by his transformation. Hyun-mi-young, now suspended in the air, reacts with surprise as he realizes that Jin Wu has actually transformed. Jin Wu slams Hyun-mi-young violently onto the ground and warns him not to speak again. Hyun-mi-young lies on the floor without moving while Kim Hannah rushes toward him in panic, calling out his name and urging him to respond. While lying there, Hyun-mi-young calmly analyzes the situation in his mind. He realizes that Jin Wu is clearly a player, yet despite witnessing the transformation, he finds himself reacting as if nothing unusual happened. He begins questioning whether Jin Wu actually held back during the attack, wondering if the blow was less serious than it appeared. Jin Wu, still irritated, accuses Hyun-mi-young of humiliating him after he briefly lowered his guard. While remaining on the ground, Hyun-mi-young activates his hidden trait, Great Sage, and scans Jin Wu. The scan reveals that Jin Wu is a level 4 spearman. Hyun-mi-young reflects on how the leveling system of Pangenia works. From level 1 to 10, the experience required to level up increases significantly at each stage. In addition, the number of talents a player possesses also affects the amount of experience needed. Players with more talents become stronger overall, but they level up much more slowly. Jin Wu clearly belongs to the group with fewer talents. However, the real reason his level remains low is much simpler. He has never truly fought before. Hyun-myung recalls how Jin Wu, a beginner gamer, had spent his time running away ever since he was suddenly synchronized with Pangenia. Through a few fortunate events, Jin Wu managed to survive the main quest. Later, through another stroke of luck, he obtained a relatively high-tier class. After ranking high enough to gain the ability to log out, he stopped returning to Pangenia entirely. Hyun-myung understands that not everyone began with an advantage like the heart of the iron-blooded monarch. Adapting to this world would not have been easy for most players. Seoyeon approaches Jin Wu and urges him to stop, pointing out that people are staring and suggesting that they leave. Jin Wu agrees, saying his mood has already been ruined. Before leaving, he warns Hyun-myung to consider himself lucky that he survived because of Seoyeon and tells him never to approach her again. While still on the floor, Hyun-myung watches him leave and quietly notes how careless Jin Wu is. He openly revealed himself as a player and even wasted the remaining time of his golden scale transformation without concern, something that could eventually put him in danger. Kim Hana rushes to Hyun-myung again and anxiously asks if he is alright. He sits up and reassures her that he is fine. She immediately suggests reporting the incident to the police, but Hyun-myung declines. He points out that they also started the physical confrontation, so it is better to let the matter go and simply finish their meal. Before the situation can settle, the ground suddenly begins shaking. People inside the restaurant panic, believing it might be an earthquake. Hyun-myung carefully observes the sensation and quickly recognizes something familiar. He realizes that the phenomenon might be the beginning of another corrosion event. Suddenly, the ceiling and floor of the restaurant break apart, and numerous monsters emerge from the cracks. The sudden appearance causes chaos inside the building. Kim Hana panics and insists that they must run. Hyun-myung immediately quiets her and tells her to wait for a moment. As the monsters move around the restaurant, customers scramble in fear, trying to escape. However, Hyun-myung notices something unusual. The creatures are not attacking the people directly. After observing them more carefully, he realizes that the monsters are cheed worms. These creatures normally scavenge corpses rather than attacking living humans, and if they are not provoked, the greater threat that usually accompanies them does not appear. As the creatures approach, Seoyeon panics and begs Jin Wu to do something. Jin Wu gathers energy into his fist, preparing to attack. The moment Hyun-myung sees this, he immediately shouts for him to stop. However, Jin Wu ignores the warning and unleashes an energy attack, instantly killing one of the creatures. Jin Wu becomes surprised by the result, realizing that he destroyed the monster in a single strike. The sudden success boosts his confidence, and he begins attacking the remaining creatures aggressively. The surrounding crowd watches him in amazement, praising him as a Dimension warrior while using the opportunity to run away from the restaurant. As he continues killing the small monsters, Jin Wu starts believing that the creatures are not very dangerous and wonders if he had been afraid for no reason until now. Meanwhile, Hyun-myung quietly tells Kim Hana to move as far away as possible. When she asks why, he clarifies that she should get as far away as she can from Jin Wu. Suddenly, a strange red fog begins filling the restaurant. Visibility drops rapidly, and people panic as they realize they can no longer see clearly. Jin Wu also becomes alarmed as the fog blocks his vision completely. Within the thick red mist, two hands suddenly appear and grab him from behind. Shocked by the sudden attack, he barely has time to react. Behind him, a glowing red eye slowly appears in the darkness. Then a chilling voice echoes through the fog, demanding to know who killed its children. A system notification suddenly appears, informing Hyun-myung that an elite monster called the Cheed Mamba has appeared. The system also indicates that defeating it normally requires a raid party of around 20 people at level 6. Inside the thick red fog, the monster covers Jin Wu's eyes with its hand and takes control of his body. Under its influence, Jin Wu begins moving forward while being ordered to kill everyone present. Meanwhile, a terrified customer struggles to see anything in the fog and begins coughing while trying to understand what is happening. With his vision blocked, he cannot see the danger approaching. Jin Wu, now completely controlled by the monster, walks toward the man with his weapon raised, preparing to kill him. The frightened man panics as he realizes that something is wrong. Another notification appears, revealing that the blood of the Cheed worm has triggered a status ailment, causing hallucinations among those affected. Jin Wu swings his weapon toward the man, who becomes completely confused and terrified by the sudden attack. Before the blow can land, Hyunmi-young intervenes and cuts off Jin Wu's attacking hand, stopping the strike. After stopping the possessed player, Hyunmi-young moves forward toward the source of the disturbance. He states that he had hoped not to get involved, but the monster crossed the line. He then demands that it reveal itself. In response, a voice begins laughing loudly within the fog, commenting that it has found an interesting human. Soon after, the red monster, known as the Chid Mamba, appears in front of him. Hyunmi-young calmly faces the creature. At the same time, Kim Hana runs through the fog, desperately calling out for Hyunmi-young while trying to find him. While engaging the monster, Hyunmi-young reflects on the situation. The thick fog created by the Chid Mamba has blocked everyone's vision, which gave him the opportunity to transform without being noticed. However, even with that transformation, the monster is not an easy opponent. He knows that without prior knowledge of the creature's attack patterns, he would have already been killed. During the fight, the monster begins noticing something unusual about him. Although Hyunmi-young's physical abilities do not appear particularly overwhelming, he continues avoiding every attack with perfect timing, almost as if he already knows what the monster will do next. The Chid Mamba then launches multiple tentacles toward him. Hyunmi-young moves forward through the attack, cutting the tentacles precisely while anticipating the next movement pattern of the monster. Suddenly, the creature releases a blood-based attack. Recognizing the technique immediately, Hyunmi-young grabs a nearby table and uses it as a shield. He understands that the blood attack can inflict a dangerous status ailment if it makes contact. The monster follows with another powerful tentacle strike that shatters the table he used for protection. Hyunmi-young narrowly evades the attack at the last moment. Watching him continue to avoid every strike, the monster expresses its surprise. It acknowledges that his evasion ability is remarkable, but points out that dodging alone will not defeat it if his attacks cannot reach its body. Hyunmi-young remains calm and confidently states that it will not be long before his attack pierces straight through the monster's forehead. Hyunmi-young then takes out the Fairy Queen's Tear, a special talisman he had kept for emergencies. A system notification appears, explaining that he is using the Fairy Queen's Tear to equip Hermes' shoes even though his current stats normally do not meet the requirement. The talisman temporarily reduces the equipment restrictions. At the same time, Michaela's armor and Michaela's helmet are equipped, activating the set bonus called Celestial Dragonborn, along with the swiftness effect from Hermes' shoes. Standing in front of the Chid Mamba, Hyunmi-young equips all of his high-tier gear. He reflects that it was fortunate he had purchased these items earlier from his secret auction house. He also apologizes in his thoughts to Hudson, since he originally intended to avoid using the Fairy Queen's Tear unless it became absolutely necessary. Once fully equipped, Hyunmi-young rushes toward the monster at incredible speed while reminding himself that he will still keep the promise he made. The Chid Mamba immediately lashes out with one of its tentacles, but before the attack can reach him, Hyunmi-young dodges it effortlessly. Using the momentum, he propels himself forward again and moves so quickly that he appears behind the monster. The creature turns around in anger and retaliates by releasing multiple spikes from its body. Hyunmi-young counters the attack by cutting and deflecting the spikes with precise strikes from his sword. However, the monster manages to swing another tentacle toward him. Hyunmi-young blocks it with his arm, but the force of the impact sends him crashing to the ground. At that moment, he activates the Celestial Dragonborn set option from Michaela's equipment. Two large dragon wings appear from his back, stopping him from being pushed further and stabilizing his position. Seeing this, the Chid Mamba becomes irritated and realizes that Hyunmi-young still has more abilities left. The monster then unleashes a powerful stream of blood from its mouth toward him. Hyunmi-young spreads his wings and tries to escape into the air while realizing that this attack matches the Chid Mamba's final attack pattern. He understands that if he can survive this one attack, an opportunity will appear. The monster intensifies the blood attack, flooding the surrounding area with its poisonous liquid and believing that escape is impossible. Hyunmi-young rises higher into the air and releases a strong burst of wind that shatters and disperses the incoming bloodstream, successfully avoiding the attack. The monster becomes shocked when it realizes that he is using wind pressure to blow away its poisonous fog. While still airborne, Hyunmi-young recalls the monster's complete attack cycle. The Chid Mamba has four main patterns: dodge attacks, blood spatter, needle spikes, and poisonous fog. After using all four patterns, the monster briefly enters a state of confusion where it becomes unable to move. However, once it recovers, the next cycle begins again with even stronger attacks. This means the short moment of confusion is the only chance to defeat it. Recognizing that the moment has arrived, Hyunmyeong rushes forward at full speed with his sword. The Cheat Mamba realizes the danger too late and tries to stop him, but Hyunmyeong reaches it instantly and drives his sword directly into the center of the monster's head, fulfilling the statement he made earlier that he would soon pierce its forehead. After the battle ends, a system notification appears informing Hyunmyeong that he has successfully eliminated the elite monster Cheat Mamba. The system shows that his contribution to the battle was 100%. He also begins absorbing the broken golden scale fragment, which starts a timed effect. The system displays the remaining duration for the fragment and also indicates the current progression toward the collapse of Pangea, which has reached 9.1%. As a reward, he additionally obtains an item called Lucky Dice. The monster's body collapses onto the ground, while Hyunmyeong remains standing nearby. As the creature dies, the thick fog that had covered the area slowly fades away. People in the restaurant begin to notice that the fog is disappearing, signaling that the danger has ended. Kim Hana looks around in confusion while trying to understand what just happened and realizes that the situation finally seems to be over. Hyunmyeong quickly equips an invisible cloak, hiding his identity before anyone can clearly see him. While looking toward him, Hana recognizes the figure and remembers the mysterious person who had saved her earlier. She calls out and asks if he remembers her. Seeing that Hana is safe, Hyunmyeong silently acknowledges it to himself. However, instead of responding, he activates the cloak and disappears from sight before she can get closer. Hana asks him to stay and talk for a moment, but by then he is already gone. She remains standing there, staring at the dissolving body of the monster while still confused about everything that happened. Shortly afterward, Hyunmyeong returns after transforming back into his normal appearance. He approaches Hana from behind and calls her name. She turns around and reacts with relief when she sees him. Hyunmyeong tells her that he finally found her after they were separated during the chaos and asks if she is hurt anywhere. Hana assures him that she is fine. Hyunmyeong says he is relieved that she is safe and comments that he never expected them to get caught up in something like that. While speaking with him, Hana notices blood on one of his fingernails and asks if he has been injured. Hyunmyeong quickly brushes it off, explaining that it must be monster blood that splashed onto him and tells her not to worry. However, he realizes internally that he had not noticed the blood on his nails before. Hana becomes suspicious because his clothes are completely clean while only his nails have blood on them. She also remembers that he remained unusually calm when the monsters first appeared. This makes her wonder if he somehow knew what was happening beforehand. Hyunmyeong casually denies it and claims that everything was so chaotic that he simply spoke without thinking. Hana argues that he clearly looked composed at the time. Hyunmyeong continues insisting that he was actually scared. Although he acts normal, Hana begins suspecting that something about him does not add up, especially since he appeared right after the mysterious person who saved her disappeared. The scene then shifts to the next day. A news broadcast reports that not long after the First Dimension War incident, another similar event has occurred. Members of the Dimension Warrior groups warn that these invasions could continue in the future. As a result, many facilities have temporarily closed, and experts believe that long-term cooperation between the government and these organizations will be necessary. Because of fear and uncertainty, many citizens are staying indoors, leaving the streets unusually empty. At the same time, some people are criticizing the government for previously claiming that another tragedy like the first incident would not happen and for downplaying the scale of damage, which they believe led to additional victims during the second incident. Inside a room, several individuals watch this news report together. One of them comments that the authorities were careless during the first invasion, but are now reacting strongly after the second incident. Another person explains that those who were not directly affected before probably could not fully understand the seriousness of monster attacks, since such events are far outside normal expectations. A third person adds that because the situation was unprecedented, the government likely tried to maintain a sense of normalcy at first. After listening to the discussion, Park Tae-woo, the leader of the Hero Alliance within the Player Alliance, speaks up. He states that this second incident has made everyone realize that these invasions can happen repeatedly. According to him, the current situation creates the perfect opportunity for their alliance to officially launch and begin recruiting talented players before other alliances do the same. Back in the room, the brown-haired woman explains that they are already analyzing the CCTV footage mentioned earlier. Although the video quality is poor, it appears that a single person defeated the Cheat Mamba alone. If that information is correct, she suggests that the person might be Randolph, the player who recently ranked first in the new main quest. The black-haired man raises a concern. According to available records, Randolph has only cleared the second main quest so far, which means his level should only be around 4 or 5. Because of that, it seems strange that he was able to equip Hermes' shoes, which normally require much higher stats. Park Tae-woo, the leader of the Hero Alliance, responds that the player may have used a special talisman to bypass the equipment requirements. Regardless of the exact method, he believes the player is extremely valuable and someone their alliance must recruit. He also points out that the mysterious figure known as Phantom disappeared around the same time this new player appeared. Although it is not certain, there is a possibility that Randolph and Phantom are the same person. Because they cannot trust the other player alliances, Tae-woo insists that they must secure this individual first, especially with a major threat known as the coming rift approaching. The scene then shifts back to the casino, inside the office of its boss. Hudson reacts with shock and panic after learning something important. He realizes that Hyun-mi-young used the Fairy Queen's tear and asks him directly if that is true. Hyun-mi-young calmly confirms that he did use it. Hudson becomes upset because he believed that Hyun-mi-young intended to give the talisman to him. Hyun-mi-young clarifies that he only promised to help him achieve his goal, not to hand over the item itself. He tells Hudson to think carefully about the difference. Hudson is confused by this response. Hyun-mi-young explains that Hudson does not actually need the talisman to accomplish what he wants. According to him, removing the Fairy Queen's tear prevents Hudson from relying on false hope. Privately, Hyun-mi-young admits to himself that he cannot reveal the real reason he used the talisman, which was to defeat the Cheed Mamba. Hudson then asks whether that means there is another way to reach his goal. Hyun-mi-young notices the distrust on his face and jokingly remarks that he might feel hurt by that reaction. Hudson replies that under the current circumstances, it is difficult for him to trust him. Hyun-mi-young simply smiles and tells him to follow along, promising that he will soon give him a reason to trust him. The scene then moves to Arcana, the underground city of gold, specifically within the sewers dungeon. As they walk through the dark sewer tunnels, Hudson questions why they came to such a dangerous place. Hyun-mi-young explains that he wants to clear up Hudson's doubts and also create a waypoint in Arcana before they travel to another location that can grant Hudson's wish. In his thoughts, Hyun-mi-young reflects on the teleport book he obtained earlier from Dramit. The item allows him to teleport to previously explored locations once per day after a short casting time, but it only works in areas that have already been explored and registered as waypoints. Although he originally wanted to explore all of Arcana, there is not enough time, so he decides that registering the sewers dungeon will be sufficient for now. Hudson becomes increasingly nervous and questions whether they're truly planning to explore the dungeon with only 3 people. He explains that the boss monster of this area is a monster rat, a raid boss that normally requires a party of at least 6 level 8 players to defeat. Hyun-mi-young pauses briefly and calmly replies that he is already aware of that. Almost immediately after, a huge creature appears before them. A system notification announces the arrival of the sewer's mutant monster rat, a dungeon raid boss with a recommended raid party of 6 level 8 players. The monster begins roaring and rapidly moves around them at incredible speed. Hudson panics internally because the monster rat is known for using its speed as its primary weapon. Normally, a coordinated group would surround and gradually corner the creature before defeating it. However, they have entered the dungeon without preparation, making the situation seem reckless. While the monster circles them, Hyun-mi-young suddenly calls out to Isabella. She instantly draws her weapon. Hyun-mi-young gives her a precise direction to attack. Following his instruction, she moves immediately and delivers a powerful strike exactly where he indicated. In his thoughts, Hyun-mi-young explains that even the fastest enemy becomes manageable if its attack patterns are known in advance. He also acknowledges that this strategy works especially well because Isabella's combat ability is far above that of ordinary characters. Watching this precise coordination, Hudson becomes shocked. Hyun-mi-young then calls Hudson's name and reminds him that he intends to keep the promise he made. He tells Hudson not to doubt him, emphasizing that if he says something can be accomplished, then he will make sure it happens. The scene shifts back outside the restaurant where the Cheed Mamba incident occurred. A member of the Hero Alliance reports to his captain that they checked all nearby CCTV cameras but could not find any trace of the person who defeated the monster. The captain explains that even the people who were inside the building during the incident claim they know nothing, making the situation extremely strange. The subordinate suggests meeting Jin Wu again to question him, but the captain refuses. He explains that Jin Wu lost both of his arms during the incident and has become mentally unstable from the shock, so questioning him again would likely be pointless. The subordinate then asks about Kim Hannah, since she appeared to know something during the incident. The captain responds that confronting her directly would cause unnecessary trouble, especially since she works at CK Broadcasting. When the subordinate suggests simply waiting outside for her, the captain warns him not to interfere with the situation. Confused, the subordinate wonders if Kim Hana has powerful connections supporting her. The captain then asks if he knows about Gracia coming to Korea. The subordinate confirms that the news is already spread among Korean players, and that Gracia is planning to conduct a one-on-one interview with Kim Hana. The scene then shifts to the broadcasting company. Gracia arrives at the studio for the interview and introduces himself. Kim Hana greets him respectfully as a reporter from Korea while cameras record the meeting. The story briefly returns outside the restaurant where the Hero Alliance members are still talking. The subordinate jokingly wonders why Gracia would want to interview a single reporter. The captain admits he does not know the reason, but warns him again not to get involved. Privately, the captain reflects on the situation. Without the mysterious player known as Phantom, Gracia is widely considered the strongest player. Someone of that level traveling to Korea just to interview a reporter seems suspicious. However, because Gracia is so powerful, the captain decides it is safest for their alliance to stay out of his affairs, since even a small mistake could put their entire group in danger. The scene then moves to another location. An injured player lies on the ground after being defeated. A mysterious attacker approaches him and calmly asks if the fight is already over. The wounded man protests, saying that killing another player in the real world should be forbidden. He argues that Gracia himself declared that real-world player-versus-player combat should not happen while preparing for the invasion. The attacker dismisses this claim and questions who actually has the authority to enforce such rules. Before the injured player can continue speaking, the attacker silences him and kills him with a knife. After leaving the scene, the attacker receives a system notification announcing that the rankings have changed. The system registers him in the class acquisition rankings and informs him that he has gained the rights to the secret auction house. The attacker's player name is revealed to be Massacre. In his thoughts, Massacre concludes that the player known as Randolph must actually be Phantom. He believes that the high score Randolph has accumulated cannot be explained otherwise. Expecting Phantom to challenge the main quest soon, Massacre decides to wait at a certain location where he believes they will eventually meet, planning to kill him personally. The story then shifts to a barren desert. Hyun-mi-young and his companions are traveling across the area using a cart. While riding, Hyun-mi-young reflects that the trip to the sewer dungeon turned out better than expected. Although he originally went there only to register a waypoint, he obtained a mutant monster rat core, a material capable of causing mutations in beasts and useful for evolving creatures, such as the Hydreigon. The item description explains that it can strengthen beast-type souls through a hidden trait known as Beast Lord. While traveling, Hyun-mi-young asks Hudson if he properly settled the situation with the casino before leaving. Hudson confirms that he followed all the instructions. Although he feels some regret about leaving the casino behind, he accepts that it was necessary if they are going to be away for a long time. He also declares that he has decided to trust and follow Hyun-mi-young. Thinking back on the earlier battle, Hudson recalls how Isabella defeated the monster rat almost by herself. However, what impresses him even more is Hyun-mi-young's ability to act as if he already understands everything happening around them. Because of this, Hudson concludes that Hyun-mi-young is far from an ordinary person and decides that following him might be the best opportunity he will ever get. After hearing his answer, Hyun-mi-young remarks that if everything has been handled, he no longer needs to worry about money. At the same time, Isabella internally reflects that Hudson made the correct decision. Now he can focus on reaching level 10 and pursuing the path required to become a saint-blooded one. Hudson then responds humorously, saying that he can hear her thoughts, hinting at the strange dynamic forming between the three travelers as they continue their journey. Hudson then asks Hyun-mi-young where they are heading next. Hyun-mi-young responds casually, saying that he thought he had already mentioned it. However, Hudson says he does not remember hearing anything about their destination. Hyun-mi-young explains that they are going to a masterpiece, a place that will grant Hudson's wish. Confused by the term, Hudson asks what he means by that. In his thoughts, Hyun-mi-young clarifies that the place he is referring to is the Spirit Tower, which is not only connected to fulfilling Hudson's request, but is also the location where main Quest 3 begins. The scene then shifts to a forest. The three of them stand inside the area while Hudson looks around carefully. To him, the place simply appears to be an ordinary forest. Hyun-mi-young corrects him, explaining that it is not a normal forest. Standing in front of a massive tree, Hyun-mi-young reveals that the location is actually the entrance to the Spirit Tower, hidden within a place called the Rustling Forest, where a special tree known as a spirit tree grows. Hyun explains internally that a spirit tree is a tree from which spirits are born. Such trees can temporarily open a path to the spirit realm, and only by entering that path can someone reach the spirit tower. When he places his hand on the tree, however, he realizes something troubling. The tree has already died, and not just the tree, the entire forest is slowly dying as well. This suggests that no new spirits have been born there for a long time. After realizing this, Hyun draws his sword and decides to use a method he admits is not ideal but necessary under the circumstances. Hudson becomes alarmed and asks what he is about to do. Before he can react further, Hyun strikes the tree with his sword and cuts it down. The massive tree collapses, shocking Hudson, who cannot understand why Hyun would destroy what he had just called the entrance to the spirit tower. Suddenly, a beam of light appears in the sky, and an attack is launched from within it toward them. Isabella reacts immediately, drawing her weapon and blocking the incoming strike, protecting Hudson. She then points her sword toward the direction of the attack. The attacker reveals herself as a high dryad, the owner and guardian of the rustling forest. She acknowledges that blocking her attack was impressive and recognizes Isabella's skill. Hudson becomes terrified when he realizes that the enemy is a high dryad. The dryad explains that they originally believed the group to be harmless travelers who had simply wandered into the forest, which is why they allowed them to pass through. However, by cutting down the spirit tree, Hyun has committed an unforgivable act. Soon after, many more high dryads appear around them. Observing the situation, Isabella quickly estimates that there are around 40 to 50 enemies. She realizes that if all of them attack at once, the group will have no chance of winning. In the worst-case scenario, she considers that Hyun, the Saint Awakened One, must at least escape. Hyun steps forward and takes responsibility for cutting the tree, telling the dryads not to direct their anger toward the others. He explains that he deliberately destroyed the tree because otherwise the dryads would have continued hiding and never revealed themselves. One of the dryads calls him insane. Hyun then asks them to come down so they can talk, but the dryad refuses and aims an arrow at him. Instead of backing down, Hyun asks them a question, whether they intend to simply watch the forest die. This statement shocks the dryad. Hyun explains that the forest is already dying because no new spirits are being born there. Without spirits to sustain it, the entire forest will eventually perish. He points out that the dryads themselves must already know this. He then makes an offer. If they open the gate to the spirit tower, he will bring new spirits to the forest and restore it. The dryad rejects the idea at first, saying that even if they open the gate, only chosen individuals are allowed to enter the spirit tower. Someone like Hyun should not be capable of entering it. In his thoughts, Hyun recalls that normally entering the spirit tower requires specific talents, numerous quests, and extremely rare circumstances. Among players, only a handful have ever managed to enter it. Attempting to do so at Randolph's current level would normally be impossible. However, that limitation only applies if Randolph were an ordinary character. Hyun then tells the dryads to stop arguing and open the gate. At that moment, he activates his hidden trait, Druid's affinity with nature, and declares that he will personally take responsibility for restoring the forest and bringing it back to life. One of the high dryads questions Hyun's claim, asking if he is truly saying that he can save the dying forest. Another dryad immediately reacts with anger, accusing him of lying and shouting that he should be killed for destroying the spirit tree. Soon, many of the dryads begin shouting threats at once, demanding his death. Their leader raises his hand and orders everyone to stop. The leader then descends from a tree branch and lands in front of Hyun. He warns him that if he fails to keep the promise he just made, the consequences will be severe. Hyun calmly assures him that he always keeps his promises and repeats that he will bring a spirit back to the forest. The leader admits that he does not actually expect a human to accomplish something like that, but he decides to allow it for now because if Hyun fails, it will still not be too late to kill him afterward. He then tells the group to follow him. The scene shifts deeper into the forest. There, the dryads bring them to a location where a large pile of broken stone fragments lies on the ground. The leader explains that because the forest is already dying, the usual method of opening the tower's gate no longer works. The only remaining option is to use the remains of a stone spirit to activate the gate. He warns Hyun that if he fails in his attempt, he and his companions will immediately become nourishment for the forest. Hyun asks what will happen if he succeeds. After a brief pause, the dryad leader answers that he will grant a reward worthy of such an achievement. At that moment, a system notification appears. Hyun-myung receives a subquest titled, Return the Spirit to the Forest. The reward is an achievement called Friend of the Dryad, along with the gratitude of the forest itself. However, if the quest fails, his honor will decrease significantly, and he will have to fight against the entire forest. After reading the quest details, Hyun-myung remarks internally that calling the penalty a battle with the forest is a rather dramatic way to describe the situation. The Dryad leader then prepares to open the portal. He releases a golden light from his hand toward the pile of broken stone fragments. As the light touches the stones, it grows brighter and spreads throughout the area until the entire forest is filled with a blinding glow. Hyun-myung and his companions briefly cover their eyes from the intense light. A system notification then appears, informing them that a portal leading to the Tower of Spirits has been created. However, it also states that only those who receive permission will be able to enter. Hyun-myung, Hudson, and Isabella step into the portal together. Once inside, Hudson looks around in confusion and asks where they are. Isabella turns to Hyun-myung and asks if they have already entered the Tower of Spirits. Hyun-myung explains that they are not inside the tower yet. Instead, they're within the space inside the portal itself. To actually enter the tower, they must first receive permission here. Hudson then wonders who they need permission from. Before anyone can answer, a floating spherical entity surrounded by flames appears in front of them. Seeing it, Hudson assumes it must be a spirit and jokingly wonders if they simply need to capture it and take it along. Hyun-myung immediately tells him that is not the case. Hudson observes the creature more closely and comments that it looks surprisingly cute. The floating spirit moves closer to Hyun-myung and examines him carefully. After sensing the energy surrounding him, it recognizes the presence of a druid's aura. Because of this, the spirit grants Hyun-myung permission to climb the tower and then asks whether the two people standing behind him are his companions. Hyun-myung answers the spirit's question and confirms that Hudson and Isabella are indeed his companions. The floating spirit asks again if they are people he can truly trust with his life and back in battle. Hyun-myung responds in a calm but somewhat casual way, saying that they could be considered trustworthy. After hearing this, the spirit accepts them as well and grants them permission to enter the tower. However, it explains that each of them must face and pass their own individual trial inside the tower. Immediately afterward, their bodies begin dissolving into light as the system prepares to separate them. Isabella realizes what is happening and tells Hyun-myung that she will return after completing her trial. At the same time, Hudson panics as he watches his body fade away. Before they fully disappear, the spirit informs Hyun-myung that time flows differently inside the tower compared to the outside world, so they can complete their trials without worrying about the time passing in reality. It then wishes him luck as a druid. A system notification appears announcing Main Quest 3, Climb the Tower. It explains that mysterious towers exist throughout the world, and clearing one will complete a main quest, with rewards depending on what happens inside. The system also mentions that most players usually begin with the basic towers found in major cities. Hyun-myung then finds himself standing in front of a massive gate shaped like the body of a demon. As he observes it, he reflects that it has been a long time since he last entered the Tower of Spirits. Normally, entering the tower requires passing a trial, and each trial is determined by the climber's elemental affinity. He recalls that when he created Isabella, he gave her the wind affinity, meaning her trial will revolve around the wind element. Hudson, who has water affinity, will face a trial related to water. Every climber receives a trial tailored specifically to their elemental nature. However, the trial forming in front of Hyun-myung feels completely unfamiliar. He realizes that it might be because the character Randolph was created with affinity for every element, something that almost never happens. At that moment, the eyes of the demon-shaped gate begin glowing. A mysterious voice emerges from within it. The voice observes that Hyun-myung possesses affinities for elements that normally cannot coexist, such as water and fire, as well as light and darkness. It suggests that this unusual balance may be connected to the void element, which encompasses all things. However, it concludes that Hyun-myung's power goes beyond simple void affinity and resembles something closer to chaos itself. The voice then reveals that the trial he must face is called the Trial of Chaos, a trial that has never been opened before. It warns him that if chaos overwhelms him during the trial, he will never be able to return. Hyun-myung then enters the gate. On the other side, he arrives in a long corridor that leads toward another gate at the far end. While standing there, he reflects on the situation. For 5 years, he played Panginia without missing a single day. Because of that, he considers himself one of the players who knows the most about the game and its world. Yet even with all that experience, the game still continues to surprise him with unknown systems and hidden mechanics. He acknowledges that Panginia is a game known for its extreme difficulty, so difficult that clearing everything feels almost impossible. However, the mystery and challenge are exactly what make it so appealing. Smiling to himself, he admits that this is the reason he loves the game so much. Drawing his sword, he decides that since this trial has never been cleared before, he will become the first person to complete it. At that moment, a tall man with long gray hair suddenly appears in front of him. The moment Hyunmi-young sees the man's face, he becomes shocked. He recognizes him as Wilhelm, a character he personally trained and raised in the game. Hyunmi-young cannot understand why that character is now appearing as part of his trial. Wilhelm immediately launches a powerful attack. Hyunmi-young barely avoids it at the last moment by dropping low to the ground. He attempts to counterattack, but the opponent easily knocks his weapon away. Wilhelm then follows up with another overwhelming strike. Watching the attack approach, Hyunmi-young briefly freezes as he realizes it's something important. The difficulty of this trial suggests that the system never truly expected anyone to clear it. At that moment, he once again recognizes just how unforgiving and extreme Panginia can be. At the last moment, Hyunmi-young quickly retreats, causing the gray-haired man's sword to strike the ground instead of hitting him directly. Taking advantage of that brief opening, he equips Michaela's armor, Michaela's helmet, and Hermes' shoes, then blocks the next incoming strike. As he withstands the blow, Hyunmi-young realizes that the sword was unable to fully cut through his defense. This leads him to conclude that although the opponent looks exactly like Wilhelm, his combat strength may actually be closer to Randolph's current stats rather than the original character's full power. To increase his mobility, Hyunmi-young activates the dragon wings from the Celestial Dragonborn set. He reasons that if the enemy only copied Wilhelm's appearance and not his full strength, there is no reason for him to be intimidated. Using a powerful burst of wind, he launches the gray-haired opponent into the air, sending him crashing into the stone wall behind. While the opponent lies on the ground with his sword, Hyunmi-young moves forward to finish the fight. However, the gray-haired man suddenly rises again and counterattacks with a strong kick that forces Hyunmi-young to evade. During the exchange, the opponent questions whether Hyunmi-young came to reclaim his past glory and suggests that such a thing may be impossible. The words confuse Hyunmi-young, who does not understand what the trial is trying to imply. After dodging another attack, though still receiving a minor hit, Hyunmi-young angrily grabs the man by the hair and calls him fake. He then swings his sword and decapitates the opponent. After the fight, Hyunmi-young immediately takes a healing potion from his inventory and drinks it to recover his health. He reflects that it was fortunate he had stocked up on potions using money earned from Hudson's casino, otherwise the battle could have ended much worse for him. However, the situation becomes even more difficult when numerous identical copies of the gray-haired man suddenly appear around him. The story briefly shifts to the broadcasting office. The interview between Kim, Hannah, and Gracia has just concluded, and Hannah thanks him for traveling all the way for the interview. Gracia politely replies that it was not tiring at all, but before leaving he asks her an off-the-record personal question. Confused, Hannah asks what he wants to know. Gracia explains that he is interested in the mysterious man mentioned in the article she previously wrote. He asks Hannah to tell him everything she witnessed during that incident, without leaving out any detail. The scene then returns to the trial chamber inside the tower. Hyunmi-young has managed to defeat all of the copies of the gray-haired opponent after an exhausting series of battles. He estimates that he has fought at least 100 of them and is now extremely tired. Although the enemies have stopped appearing, he notices that there is still no path leading upward. Because of this, he assumes that he may already be on the top floor of the trial. However, he has also run out of potions and hopes that the system will soon display a message confirming that he has cleared the trial. At that moment, the bodies of the defeated enemies begin dissolving. From within them, dark wind-like spirits emerge and float in the air. These entities identify themselves as spirits of chaos and appear surprised that Hyunmi-young was able to reach this point. They ask if he is a druid and express a strange sense of interest in him. Seeing them appear, Hyunmi-young assumes that their presence means he has successfully cleared the Tower of Chaos and asks if the trial is finally over. However, the spirits react with laughter. They mock the idea that someone like him could have already cleared the tower. They then reveal a shocking truth. The trial he just endured was not the real challenge at all. According to them, The actual trial of chaos has not even begun yet, and the true test lies beyond a barrier deeper within the tower. A gate slowly opens, and spirits appear behind the protagonist. They point out that he is already badly worn out just from reaching this point and question whether he can go any further. They explain that what lies ahead was never meant to be a trial that someone could simply clear. Beyond the door, they claim, there are not just a few but thousands of the same chaos illusions he has been fighting. Because of that, they insist that clearing the tower is impossible and try to convince him to give up. However, the protagonist ignores them and continues walking forward. Seeing that he is not stopping, the spirits urgently try to persuade him again. They warn him that going forward will only lead to death and start offering him various deals if he turns back. They suggest forming a contract with them, promising benefits such as power comparable to obtaining a star, the location of a unique piece of equipment in the world, or even the highest tier chaos-type skills. While continuing toward the entrance, the protagonist recalls how the Tower of Spirits works. Each trial normally grants a reward related to the element of that trial. For example, clearing the trial of fire gives a fire spirit egg, and clearing the trial of wind gives a wind spirit egg. By hatching such an egg, a person can form a contract with a spirit of that attribute. The trial he entered, however, is the trial of chaos, which had never been opened before in Pangenia. Because of that, he originally believed the reward would be a chaos spirit egg. Since spirit eggs themselves are already extremely rare, the first chaos spirit egg should be an exceptional reward. But the spirits are desperately trying to make him contract with them even before he finishes the tower. This makes him suspect that the reward beyond the door might be something even better than a chaos spirit egg. As he approaches the door and steps inside, the spirits make one last attempt to stop him, warning that he is making a foolish decision and telling him this is his final chance to turn back. The protagonist calmly responds by pointing out that they themselves said countless illusions were waiting on the other side. The spirits question whether he truly intends to fight thousands of them. He acknowledges that it will definitely be difficult, especially since he has already used up all of his potions during the previous battles. However, those repeated fights helped him memorize the patterns of the illusions completely. Because of that, he believes he no longer needs potions or extra support. If repeating the patterns he has already learned thousands of times is enough to clear the trial, then he sees no reason to avoid the challenge. The spirits react with surprise at his reasoning, finding his determination somewhat ridiculous but also strangely admirable. After passing through the door, the protagonist suddenly finds himself back in the same hotel-like place where he originally began. While he is still trying to understand the situation, a system notification appears stating that he has ascended to the top of the tower and that the third main quest has been completed. Confused by this sudden message, he questions whether the quest is really already finished. At that moment, the spherical structure he encountered earlier appears again and congratulates him for successfully climbing the tower. It also informs him that his companions are still alive. The protagonist then realizes that the earlier claim about the real trial beginning afterward must have been a lie. The structure confirms this and explains that if he had accepted a contract with the Chaos Spirits earlier, he would have been trapped there for the rest of his life. Understanding the situation, the protagonist concludes that the spirits were deliberately deceiving him. The structure explains that Chaos Spirits naturally tend to lie, although the protagonist should have noticed a hint of this during the trial itself. Realizing the meaning behind that hint, he finally understands what happened. The structure then tells him to receive the tower's clear reward and asks him to hold out his hand. A system notification appears stating that he has cleared the Tower of Chaos and that the reward is being distributed. The protagonist assumes that, since nothing else seems hidden, the reward will likely be the Chaos Spirit Egg he originally expected. Although that would be slightly less impressive than he imagined earlier, it would still be a valuable reward. However, the notification reveals that he has obtained not only a Chaos Spirit Egg, but also something called a Heavenly Spirit Egg. When the egg appears in his hand, the protagonist is shocked, realizing that the reward is something completely unexpected. The protagonist then receives a new notification describing the Heavenly Spirit Egg. The message explains that it is an unknown egg that supposedly came from the heavenly realm and exists at the end of the forces of light, darkness, and chaos. It also states that only celestials are capable of seeing and hatching it. After reading this, the protagonist begins thinking about what it could mean. Celestials are known as the heavenly race that resides in the heavenly realm. Since he was able to obtain and see the egg, it suggests that he might actually belong to that race. This possibility makes him wonder if the egg is related to his hidden trait called heavenly. Until now, he assumed the name might just be a coincidence, but the description of the egg makes him suspect that the trait could actually be connected to the heavenly race. Curious, he asks the spherical structure if it knows what the egg is. The structure admits that it does not know the exact details either, except that it is clearly not an ordinary egg. However, it adds that even the Spirit Kings appear to be interested in it. Hearing this surprises the protagonist. The Spirit Kings are among the strongest beings in existence and act as major mediators within the world of Pangenia. If even those beings are paying attention to the egg, then it must be something extremely valuable. Although he wants to learn more about it, there is currently no way for him to find out. Because of that, he stores the egg in his inventory and decides that the only way to understand it is by hatching it later. Soon after, another system notification appears confirming that he has successfully completed main quest 3, Climb the Tower, and has become the first person to conquer the Tower of Chaos. The message describes the achievement as unprecedented and gives him a total score of 240 points, after which the Hall of Fame rankings are updated. At the same time, several constellations from the 100 Stars Temple react to his accomplishment. Different constellations express amazement, curiosity, or praise for his performance, and each of them upgrades his rewards. One constellation is impressed by his luck, another is excited by his adventurous actions. One praises him for overcoming a battle against himself. Another shows interest because he obtained the heavenly spirit egg, and another remembers his name. As a result of their attention, the grade of his rewards is transcended, allowing him to choose 2 rewards from a list of 20. The protagonist is surprised by how far the rewards have been upgraded. Previously, some constellations showed interest in him at Dramit's Sanctuary, but he did not expect that 5 of these powerful beings would pay attention to him at once. In Pangenia's setting, constellations play an important role similar to the Spirit Kings. From a player's perspective, maintaining a good relationship with them is beneficial because they can grant special quests or upgrade rewards depending on how challenges are completed. According to the game's lore, they are particularly fond of interesting stories created by human actions, which likely explains why they were entertained by the unique trial he experienced in the Tower of Chaos. Sometime later, Isabella and Hudson also clear the tower and come out. Isabella receives a wind spirit egg as her reward, while Hudson obtains a water spirit egg. The number of spirit eggs given as rewards is determined randomly, and in Isabella's case, she is fortunate enough to obtain 2 eggs. She decides to keep her promise to the Dryads by giving one of them the wind spirit egg. If the spirit eventually hatches and is released into the forest, Barok Forest will be able to recover its lost vitality. As gratitude for this act, the Dryads reward them with a powerful elixir called Mandragora, which is made from a 1,000-year medicinal herb that has absorbed the forest vitality. Naturally, the elixir is given to Isabella since she was the one who provided the spirit egg. This means that she will likely become even stronger in the future. Afterward, the protagonist receives another notification confirming that a wind spirit has been returned to Barok Forest. This completes a subquest and grants the title Dryad Friend, along with the forest gratitude. A new waypoint is also added to the teleport book, which now contains 3 locations: Desert Sanctuary, Arcana Sewers, and Barok Forest. The message also notes that Dryads never betray someone they trust, as long as that person does not harm the forest. The Hall of Fame rankings are then updated again. With his score of 240 points, Randolph takes first place, surpassing the previous maximum point limit. Because of this, he obtains the main Quest 3 privilege called Guardian Wall, and the ability itself is upgraded due to his unusually high score. Later, the scene shifts to the group traveling in a cart driven by a Hydreigon. While the protagonist is sitting inside, another notification appears explaining the details of the Guardian Wall ability. This skill protects the user's body while they are logged out and warns them if danger approaches. The strength of the protection depends on the level of the skill, and at level 11, it can completely nullify attacks from enemies rated 1 star or lower for 30 seconds. After reading the description, the protagonist feels relieved. When he logs into Pangenia, the ability protects his real-world body, Park Hyunmyeong. When he returns to reality, it protects his character Randolph inside the game. Considering the dangers that could arise in the future, having this protection gives him some peace of mind. He also notes that there are still 72 hours remaining on the broken golden scale fragment, and having more time left will be helpful for his plans. During the journey, Hudson thanks him sincerely. He explains that he never expected to obtain a spirit egg and hopes to hatch it as soon as possible, believing that a spirit may help him solve the problem that has been holding him back. The protagonist understands what Hudson is referring to. Advancing from level 9 to level 10 is extremely difficult to accomplish alone, but with the assistance of a spirit, it should become possible. Hudson enthusiastically agrees and says that once they return, the first thing he plans to do is buy a spirit incubator to hatch the egg. The protagonist then mentions that he has somewhere he needs to visit before heading back and asks if Hudson would like to come along. Hudson immediately agrees, saying that after receiving such a great favor, he is willing to accompany him anywhere if needed. The protagonist appreciates the offer and thanks him with a smile. After traveling for a while, the group arrives in an area filled with houses. When Hudson realizes where they have stopped, he becomes visibly confused and agitated. He reacts strongly because he recognizes the place and did not expect to come here. The protagonist tells him to calm down, while Isabella asks where exactly they are going that would make Hudson react this way. The protagonist explains that they have arrived at the Knight's Garden, the territory ruled by Marquis Weiser. He also reveals that Hudson's fiancée lives there. As they begin walking forward, Hudson becomes nervous and worried. He explains that he still does not feel worthy of proposing to Serengeti yet and does not understand why they came here. The protagonist reassures him that he is not asking Hudson to propose today. Instead, he explains that he personally needs to speak with Serengeti about something. Hudson becomes curious about what the protagonist wants to ask her, but before he can get a clear answer, they continue deeper into the area. As they move forward, they pass through a district where many people appear sick or exhausted, suggesting that the area is facing serious hardship. Eventually, they reach a place where people are gathered in front of a large engraved pillar while praying. After observing the scene, Isabella realizes that the people seem to be holding a memorial service. The protagonist then asks her if she recognizes any of the names written on the pillar. Isabella says that she does not. The protagonist then explains that the pillar contains around 500 names, all belonging to knights who followed him during the great expedition in the past. He reflects on how, at that time, he never found it strange that he did not know their names and never tried to remember them. In his mind, they were simply unnamed NPCs within the game world, characters who existed only as part of the setting and narrative. Even though they fought alongside him, he viewed them only as elements of the game rather than real individuals. While they're standing there, a woman suddenly begins crying loudly in grief. She shouts in anger and despair, demanding that someone return her son to her. Her cries become even more emotional as she calls out her son's name and recalls how he promised he would come back safely. She laments that she no longer knows how to live without him. As the protagonist walks toward her, Isabella asks where he is going. Before anyone can stop him, the woman becomes overwhelmed by her grief and collapses to the ground. The protagonist quickly catches her before she hits the floor. People nearby shout in alarm as they recognize the woman, calling her Grandma May and realizing that she has fainted. Isabella looks toward the protagonist in concern. The protagonist decides to take immediate action. Carrying the unconscious woman in his arms, he tells Isabella that they should take her to the nearby relief station. The scene then shifts to the Goddess Church relief station. Inside the building, the atmosphere is chaotic. Several patients are lying around while crying out in pain, indicating that the facility is overwhelmed. After placing the woman on a bed, Hudson looks around and notices that there are many patients but very few people working at the station. He finds it strange that such a major city would have a relief station suffering from such a severe staff shortage. Since the Knight's Garden is supposed to be one of the 3 most important cities in the Balran Kingdom, the poor condition of the station suggests that something is wrong with how the city is being managed. At that moment, a short-haired man approaches them and thanks them for bringing Sister May to the station after she collapsed. He praises them for their kindness in helping someone instead of ignoring the situation. Hudson awkwardly acknowledges the compliment. However, the man then leans closer and explains that the relief station is collecting donations from visitors in order to continue operating. He asks Hudson if he could donate 50 gold to support the station. Hudson is shocked by this request and questions whether they are charging money for medical treatment. The protagonist immediately questions the situation as well. He points out that relief stations run by the Goddess Church are normally funded by the city treasury, and accepting personal donations should not be allowed. He also emphasizes that 50 gold is an extremely high amount, roughly equivalent to a normal citizen's monthly wage, which makes the demand unreasonable. The short-haired man responds that they have no other choice. According to him, a priest named Andrew ordered that donations must now be collected in order to keep the station running. Hearing this confuses the protagonist even more. He states that he knows Priest Andrew and believes that Andrew would never do something like that. The man insists that the order really did come from Andrew. This makes the protagonist start thinking carefully about the situation. Priest Andrew is known as a high-ranking priest of the goddess church, which serves the twin goddesses Leah and Pina. In the game's setting, Andrew is portrayed as a devout and honorable figure who often gives quests related to honor-based classes. His character is supposed to be upright and virtuous. Because of that, the idea that he would secretly demand personal donations seems completely inconsistent with his established character. The protagonist then recalls other troubling details he noticed while entering the city, such as poorly maintained buildings and homeless people sitting on the streets. Even the relief station itself is clearly not functioning properly. This is particularly strange because the Knight's Garden should be a relatively wealthy city, even if it is not as rich as Arcana. All of this makes him wonder what exactly has happened to the city. The scene then shifts to the city's palace. Inside, a man is drinking heavily and repeatedly. A servant approaches him nervously and begs him to stop drinking because he has already had too much. Instead of listening, the man becomes enraged and throws an empty bottle at the servant while shouting at him to be quiet and bring more alcohol. The man is then revealed to be the Lord of the Knight's Garden, Marquis Weiser. The protagonist tells the short-haired man that he wants to meet Priest Andrew in person and asks to be taken to him. The man hesitates and explains that it would be difficult because many people are waiting to receive treatment from the priest. The protagonist then calls Hudson. Hudson steps forward and hands a pouch to the man. Confused, the man asks what it is. Hudson calmly explains that it is a donation of 50,000 gold and adds that he will double the amount if they are allowed to meet the priest immediately. Hearing the amount, the man is stunned. His attitude quickly changes, and he immediately agrees to escort them to Priest Andrew. Shortly afterward, the scene shifts to Priest Andrew's room. The priest greets them politely and introduces himself, inviting them to sit and talk. After they take their seats, the priest mentions that he heard they made a large donation to the relief station. The protagonist confirms that the donation was indeed large. He explains that he had heard the station demanded 50 gold even just to receive treatment, so he assumed that meeting the priest would require offering an even larger amount. The priest responds calmly and asks if the protagonist is disappointed to find that he appears to be an old priest concerned with money. He admits the situation is embarrassing, but says little in defense of himself. The protagonist clarifies that he is not judging him, but is simply curious. He wants to understand how a relief station in such a large city could end up in a situation where it desperately needs money to operate. At this point, the priest suddenly slams his hands on the table and begins explaining the situation. He first mentions Sister May, the woman the protagonist brought in earlier. Her only son joined the Demon World Great Expedition and never returned. Since then, she has lived with constant grief and guilt, blaming herself for not stopping him. The priest explains that her situation is not unique. Many people in the city lost family members during that expedition. Numerous knights who admired Wilhelm, the Night King, joined the campaign with the goal of defeating the Demon King, but most of them never came back. Because of this, the Knight's Garden lost many talented individuals and spent enormous resources on the war effort. Although the city suffered heavy losses, it was prosperous enough that it might have recovered over time. However, the real problem began when Serengeti, a blood relative of Marquis Weiser, returned from the expedition. She came back severely injured, having lost both of her legs. Since her return, she has remained unconscious for unknown reasons. Many priests, including Andrew himself, attempted to wake her, but were unable to do so. Marquis Weiser then gathered rare elixirs and searched desperately for a solution, but none of the attempts worked. As time passed, the city's finances, which were already weakened by the war, began collapsing. In his desperation to save Serengeti, the Marquis lost his judgment and became vulnerable to fraudsters and swindlers. Eventually, he took on massive debts and even used the territory itself as collateral. After that, he fell into complete despair and stopped functioning as a proper ruler. Because of this collapse, the city government cut off all subsidies that once supported institutions like the relief stations. Now only a single relief station remains in the entire city. If it were to close as well, the sick and injured residents would have nowhere to go. Because of this desperate situation, the staff began requesting donations from visitors, even though doing so was shameful and normally forbidden. They simply no longer have enough beds, supplies, or staff to properly care for everyone. After hearing the explanation, the protagonist says he now understands the overall situation. He then asks whether Serengeti's condition is caused by mental trauma or a physical injury. Priest Andrew explains that if the problem were something simple like that, they would have already treated it. From their observations, it appears that Serengeti is under some kind of curse. Unfortunately, the curse is beyond Andrew's ability to remove. Hearing this, the protagonist begins thinking about a possible solution. Since Isabella once suffered from a similar curse, it might be possible to break Serengeti's condition using the blessing of the stars. With that in mind, the protagonist stands up and thanks the priest for the information, saying that he should leave now. Priest Andrew is surprised by the sudden decision. The protagonist explains that he now has business with Marquis Weiser. The priest tries to stop him and warns that the Marquis rarely receives visitors anymore because he has become mentally broken. He offers to arrange a meeting in a few days as a way to repay the donation. However, the protagonist refuses, saying he does not have time to wait. He also tells the priest not to worry about the donation because he already received something valuable in return. Confused, Priest Andrew asks what he means by that. As the protagonist is about to leave Priest Andrew's room, a loud voice suddenly echoes from outside, calling for the priest. A soldier soon enters the room and announces that the Lord has ordered the guest who donated to the relief station to be brought to him immediately. Hearing this, the protagonist remarks that bringing money seems to make it easy to gain access. After that, he tells the priest that he will take his leave. Before he goes, Priest Andrew stops him and thanks him sincerely. He explains that regardless of the reason behind the donation, he is grateful for the help. The protagonist dismisses the thanks and says the priest should not worry about the donation since the money was not even his to begin with. However, the priest clarifies that he is not thanking him for the money, but for helping Sister May earlier. As the protagonist leaves, he casually says that it is good to see Andrew again. This surprises the priest, who wonders what he meant by again. The scene then shifts to the mansion of the city's lord. When they arrive, Isabella and Hudson are asked to remain outside with the soldiers while the protagonist enters the mansion alone. Inside, the lord sits at a large dining table and drinks tea while observing the protagonist carefully. He thinks about the fact that this man recently donated 100,000 gold to the relief station. The lord wonders whether the visitor might be a traveling merchant, although he does not appear to be carrying goods. He also considers the possibility that the protagonist is simply a wealthy young noble wandering around. The lord then formally introduces himself as Weiser, the ruler of the Knight's Garden, and apologizes for inviting him so abruptly. Upon hearing his name, the protagonist reflects on how much Weiser has changed. In the past, Marquis Weiser was known across the continent as a talented knight with exceptional skill. His daughter Serengeti once obtained a star and became a one-star transcendent in Pangania with the protagonist's help back when he lived as Wilhelm, the Night King. She later rose to become one of the strongest individuals on the continent. Because of her achievements, the Weiser family gained great influence within the Balran kingdom. Out of gratitude, Marquis Weiser pledged loyalty to Wilhelm. He was once known as a man who repaid hostility with his sword and repaid kindness with unwavering loyalty. Now, however, the protagonist wonders whether only Weiser's outward appearance has changed or if his spirit has also been broken. The lord then explains that the Knight's Garden is currently facing severe financial difficulties. Because of this, he wants to propose something that would benefit both of them. Before he can continue, the protagonist suddenly states that he can cure Serengeti. The statement shocks the lord at first, but then he begins laughing. His laughter quickly turns into anger as he assumes the protagonist is another opportunist trying to take advantage of his desperation. He accuses him of hearing rumors that mentioning Serengeti's condition can make the Marquis hand over large sums of money. The lord sarcastically asks how much the protagonist wants in return for curing her, mentioning large amounts of gold, and even questioning whether he plans to demand control over the territory itself. Frustrated by the many fraudsters who have deceived him before, he angrily declares that he has already lost too much. Believing the protagonist to be another con artist, he orders his soldiers to gouge out the man's eyes and throw him out. The protagonist calmly responds that he does not want any money and asks the lord to listen until the end. He admits he cannot guarantee success, but he believes there is a real possibility that he can treat Serengeti. The lord becomes slightly curious at this response and questions why a stranger would help his daughter without expecting payment. In response, the protagonist explains that he is both repaying a debt and collecting one. This confuses the lord even more. The protagonist then reveals that he is the successor of Wilhelm, the Night King to whom Weiser once swore loyalty. He asks the lord to take him to Serengeti because he has something he needs to ask her. In exchange, He promises to heal the daughter who sacrificed herself for her master. The Lord laughs again and dismisses the claim. He says that many people across the continent falsely claim to be the successor of the Night King, and he assumes the protagonist is just another one of them. Losing his patience, the Lord orders the soldiers to kill the protagonist and the two companions waiting outside as well. A soldier immediately moves to attack with his sword. However, the protagonist calmly watches the strike and dodges it at the last possible moment with minimal effort. He then delivers a powerful punch that knocks the soldier away. After demonstrating his strength, the protagonist tells the Lord to prepare the play. He declares that he will prove that he truly is Wilhelm's successor. The scene then shifts to an arena inside the mansion grounds. The protagonist stands in the arena facing another warrior, while Marquis Weiser and several soldiers observe the duel from the gallery above. Isabella and Hudson are also watching from a stance. Hudson is confused about what is happening and wonders why a duel has suddenly been arranged. Isabella admits that she does not fully understand either. She explains that the protagonist has always been unpredictable, but even she did not expect the situation to escalate to this point. In the arena, the protagonist remains calm and carefully studies his opponent. He notices that the warrior is wearing a complete set of equipment that has been blessed by high-ranking priests, indicating that the opponent is entering the fight with powerful support. The warrior then addresses the protagonist and questions whether he is truly the successor of the Night King. He warns that if the claim is a lie, the protagonist should confess immediately and ask for forgiveness, since doing so might still save his life. The protagonist responds casually and tells the warrior not to worry about that. Instead, he reminds him to keep the promise of not revealing his identity publicly, even if the warrior ends up losing and feels embarrassed afterward. The warrior agrees, stating that he will keep his word as a knight. With that said, he prepares to test the protagonist's abilities and launches forward to begin the fight. As the battle begins, the warrior attacks swiftly with his sword. The protagonist avoids a strike with quick movements and notes that his opponent is quite fast. The warrior continues pressing forward with powerful swings, but the protagonist repeatedly evades the attacks while drawing his own sword. While fighting, the protagonist evaluates the situation internally. Even though many high-ranking knights died during the Great Expedition, his opponent's base abilities are still likely higher than his own current stats. On top of that, the opponent's superior equipment creates an additional disadvantage, meaning the protagonist cannot afford to treat the fight lightly. At one point, the warrior tries to grab the protagonist's sword, forcing him to pull back. The warrior immediately follows up with another strong attack. In response, the protagonist steps forward and blocks the incoming strike in an unusual way, stopping the blade by bracing the crossguard of the sword against his forehead. This unexpected technique shocks the warrior, who realizes that the protagonist is not simply a fraud, but someone reckless and determined enough to fight in such a dangerous manner. From the gallery above, a soldier comments that the protagonist moves quite well. However, Marquis Weiser dismisses the action as nothing more than a cheap trick. Even so, Weiser continues observing closely. In his thoughts, he recalls that many people have falsely claimed to be the successor or disciple of the Night King in order to gain fame. However, he also remembers seeing Wilhelm's swordsmanship with his own eyes. That technique had surpassed ordinary human limits and was something far beyond what most people could even understand. Because of that, Weiser decides he will not believe the protagonist's claim unless he witnesses a glimpse of that extraordinary skill. Back in the arena, the duel continues. The warrior swings his sword with force, while acknowledging that the protagonist is clearly more capable than the frauds he has encountered before. He even suggests that the protagonist has talent and offers him a chance to admit the lie and join his ranks. If he accepts, the warrior promises to request a pardon from the Lord. The protagonist blocks the attack and points out that the warrior is speaking confidently despite fighting with a full set of equipment against someone who is only level 3. The warrior explains that wearing the equipment was the Lord's order and that he is not particularly comfortable with the situation either. At that moment, the protagonist suddenly kicks the warrior directly in the face, pushing him back. After landing the blow, he remarks sarcastically that it must be nice to have access to such powerful equipment. He then jumps into the air and declares that he will demonstrate his own advantage, the power of items. During the jump, he throws his current sword toward the warrior. The blade strikes the warrior's chest and drops to the ground. Immediately afterward, the protagonist equips 2 EX iron swords from his inventory. The sudden appearance of the dual weapons shocks the spectators. From the gallery, A soldier reacts in surprise upon seeing the protagonist switch to dual swords. Hudson is equally shocked and wonders where the protagonist obtained weapons like those. With both swords in hand, the protagonist launches a rapid series of attacks. The speed and intensity of the strikes begin forcing the warrior backward, and the momentum of the fight shifts as the protagonist starts to dominate the duel. As the battle continues, the warrior is gradually pushed backward by the protagonist's relentless attacks. While defending himself, he analyzes the situation. He notices that the gaps between the protagonist's strikes are becoming shorter, suggesting that the protagonist is trying to overwhelm him with speed. However, the warrior also observes that the attacks themselves feel light. From his perspective, the strategy seems flawed. If the protagonist had used a heavy weapon, such as a greatsword, the higher damage might have been able to break through his heavily reinforced armor. Dual swords, on the other hand, are faster but deal much less damage. Because of this, the warrior believes that as long as he protects his vital areas, the attacks will not seriously threaten him. Since his defensive resources are limited, he even thinks that this predictable pattern may actually make the fight easier for him. At that moment, the protagonist suddenly switches weapons and equips a different sword. Immediately afterward, he delivers a powerful strike to the warrior's chest, sending him crashing to the ground. The sudden change shocks the warrior, who realizes that the protagonist is switching weapons during combat. The protagonist then tells the warrior to pay close attention, saying that he is about to demonstrate the true swordsmanship of the Night King. At this point, the story briefly shifts to an earlier moment when the protagonist was selecting rewards after clearing the Tower of Chaos. A translucent system screen appeared in front of him, listing 20 possible rewards from which he could choose two. While reviewing the list, he focused on the details of the EX Iron Sword. He noticed that although the weapon's base stats were not particularly impressive because it was an upgraded version of a very common weapon, its additional effects were extremely powerful. One of the key features was a proficiency correction effect that significantly improved weapon proficiency. Since he was allowed to choose two rewards, he realized that obtaining two of the same sword could activate the ultimate set effect tied to the weapon. Even though he already possessed the Michela armor set, he wondered if the system would allow him to select the same item twice. When he made the selection, the system confirmed that he had successfully acquired two EX Iron Swords. The success surprised him, but it also activated several hidden trait effects. System notifications then indicated that his weapon proficiency was increasing through multiple sources. The hidden trait Weapon Master raised his proficiency further, while another hidden trait related to dexterity increased all proficiencies. Each EX Iron Sword also provided additional proficiency boosts, and the ultimate set effect added another increase. After these boosts pushed his sword proficiency to level 10, another effect triggered, because his class, Successor of Stars, allows him to read the memories of previous star owners under certain conditions. Reaching this level unlocked a portion of the memories belonging to the Night King Wilhelm. As a result, part of Wilhelm's swordsmanship was reproduced through those memories. Holding the swords at that time, the protagonist was confused but realized that he had gained access to a fragment of the legendary technique. The story then returns to the present duel in the arena. The protagonist advances aggressively and continues attacking the warrior with rapid strikes. During the exchange, he repeatedly switches weapons in the middle of combat, alternating between fast dual sword attacks and heavy strikes from a larger blade. Each switch creates a different rhythm of offense that prevents the warrior from adapting. While struggling to defend himself, the warrior becomes increasingly shocked. The momentum of the fight has completely shifted. Whenever he attempts to create distance, the protagonist traps him with quick dual sword attacks. When he tries to counter with force, the protagonist suddenly switches to a heavier weapon and breaks his balance. The warrior begins to feel as though the technique is beyond ordinary swordplay. Rather than simply responding to attacks, it feels as though the entire space of the battlefield is being controlled by the protagonist. Meanwhile, the protagonist reflects on how people react when they face something that surpasses their understanding. When confronted with such overwhelming skill, most individuals fall into a state of confusion where they can do nothing but watch. At that moment, nearly everyone in the arena experiences that exact reaction. Hudson, Isabella, Marquis Weiser, and even the warrior fighting him are all stunned by what they are witnessing. Then the protagonist activates a technique drawn from Wilhelm's swordsmanship, known as Genesis Heave. With a decisive motion, he delivers a powerful strike toward the warrior's neck. The warrior suddenly freezes in place, unable to react further. A moment later, his sword slips from his hand. Quietly acknowledging defeat, he admits that he has lost before collapsing to the ground. The protagonist stops and looks toward the gallery, asking loudly if there is anything else he needs to demonstrate. Watching the outcome, one of the soldiers nervously calls out to Marquis Weiser. After a moment of silence, the Lord addresses another soldier named Lucas. Then, in a dramatic shift in attitude, Marquis Weiser bows his head in respect toward the protagonist. He orders the soldiers to escort the man with the highest level of courtesy, declaring that he is the true successor of the supreme Night King, Wilhelm. The scene then shifts to Serengeti's room. She lies unconscious on the bed, while Marquis Weiser speaks to the protagonist. He explains that Serengeti has remained in this condition ever since returning from the Great Expedition. Despite trying countless methods to wake her, using rare elixirs and bringing in famous healers, nothing has worked. The protagonist then activates his hidden Great Sage trait and examines her condition. After scanning her body, he realizes that Serengeti is suffering from the Demon King's curse. Because it originates from the Demon King, ordinary healing methods would never work. Even powerful religious figures, such as priestesses or the Holy Emperor, would not be able to remove it. However, he believes that performing an exorcism using star energy, the power connected to a star guardian, instead of normal mana, might make it possible to weaken the curse. He walks towards Serengeti as Marquis Weiser asks if he truly has a way to wake her. The protagonist explains that he cannot guarantee success and will only attempt it once. He places his hand over Serengeti's head and activates the blessing of the stars. A golden light appears around his hand as the system notifies him that all of his star energy will be consumed. The message also states that there is not enough energy to completely break the Demon King's curse, but that the curse's limit has been temporarily lifted. Moments later, Serengeti slowly opens her eyes and weakly asks where she is. Marquis Weiser is shocked and overjoyed at the same time. He rushes toward her and asks if she recognizes him. However, Serengeti responds by calling out a different name. She says Hudson. Confused, the Marquis initially assumes she is referring to him, but quickly realizes the name does not belong to him. At that moment, Hudson, who had been nearby, steps forward, trembling with emotion. He apologizes for arriving so late. For a long time, Hudson had believed that as long as Serengeti was still alive, there would always be a chance for him. He thought that if he worked hard enough, became a member of the city council, and returned with enough status, the Marquis would eventually accept him. Even after Serengeti lost the lower half of her body, he had resolved to stay by her side and support her for the rest of her life. He believed that persistence would eventually create an opportunity. But as time passed, Serengeti's condition only worsened. Her health gradually declined, her once bright appearance faded, and her body became weaker with each passing day. If the protagonist had arrived even slightly later, Hudson might never have been able to see her again. Overwhelmed with emotion, Hudson approaches her and falls to his knees, apologizing repeatedly for coming too late. Serengeti softly calls his name in response. Marquis Weiser, however, is confused by the situation and demands to know who Hudson is and what relationship he has with his daughter. Before the situation can escalate further, the protagonist intervenes and tells everyone to calm down. He explains that although Serengeti has awakened, the Demon King's curse has not been completely removed. Hudson anxiously asks what that means, while the Marquis fears that Serengeti might fall unconscious again. The protagonist confirms that the curse is only temporarily suppressed. At best, Serengeti will be able to remain awake for the rest of the day. To remove the curse completely, they will need the power of another star. As he considers the situation, the protagonist realizes what he must do next. To fully break the curse, he needs to increase his star energy. There are only two ways to do this, by leveling up or by obtaining additional stars. More importantly, he remembers that when Wilhelm, the Night King, died, 5 stars were lost. Because of the star successor class ability that allows him to read the memories of previous star owners, recovering those stars is extremely important. If someone else acquires them first, he might lose the chance to regain Wilhelm's memories forever. So far, he has recovered only one of the stars, meaning 4 still remain. If he wants to retrieve them quickly, the best source of information would be Serengeti herself. She was present during the events surrounding Wilhelm's death, so she might know what truly happened during that time. The scene of death. For that reason, he decides he must speak with Serengeti privately. The protagonist asks everyone else to leave the room so he can talk with Serengeti alone. Outside the room, Serengeti's father and Hudson sit at a table. The father angrily confronts Hudson after learning that Hudson and Serengeti had secretly promised to marry each other. Hudson admits that it is true and apologizes for revealing it so late. Serengeti's father acknowledges that he is grateful Hudson came all this way for her, but he firmly states that Hudson will no longer be allowed to see Serengeti again. Hudson desperately argues that he knows he is not worthy yet, but he plans to join the city council soon and become someone deserving of Serengeti. He begs for a chance. However, Serengeti's father explains that the issue has nothing to do with his personal feelings toward Hudson. After the Great Expedition, the territory suffered enormous losses. Restoring the knights and continuing Serengeti's treatment required a huge amount of money. Eventually, the territory ran out of funds and had to seek help from other noble houses. At that time, Duke Sin, the head of a powerful house in the Valen Kingdom, offered financial support. His house was influential enough to rival the royal family. However, the loan came with a condition: Serengeti would eventually be sent to Duke Sin's household. Back then, Serengeti's father had no other choice. Continuing her treatment was his highest priority. He also believed that even if Serengeti never woke up and his own family collapsed, the Duke's household would not abandon her, because doing so would damage their reputation. Because of that agreement, Serengeti is scheduled to be sent to Duke Sin's house in 1 month. The father considers it an unavoidable decision to protect both the territory and Serengeti's future, and he tells Hudson that he must give up on her. Meanwhile, inside the room, Serengeti speaks with the protagonist alone. She asks who he really is. The protagonist explains that he is the successor of the Night King Wilhelm, and that he came to deliver news about Wilhelm's final moments. Serengeti immediately rejects the claim because she believes Wilhelm never had a successor. Realizing that she will not accept vague explanations, the protagonist mentions a deeply personal memory only the two of them would know. He recalls the moment when Serengeti first encountered a star and was afraid that consuming it and transcending might cause her to lose her sense of self. At that time, she had been worried that her feelings for Hudson might change. Back then, Wilhelm had not fully understood her anxiety, but looking back now, it was clear that Serengeti simply wanted her love for Hudson to remain the same. Hearing this, Serengeti becomes shocked because that conversation was known only to her and Wilhelm. The protagonist then recalls how Wilhelm encouraged her at that moment by telling her to stop hesitating and hold on to the person she loved. With tears forming in her eyes, Serengeti realizes that the person before her truly is Wilhelm, despite his different appearance. The protagonist confirms that certain circumstances caused his appearance to change, but he is indeed Wilhelm. He then reflects on the source of this memory. Back then, he had actually been a player, and the encouragement he gave Serengeti had originally been nothing more than a simple emotion expression chosen through a keyboard command. However, thanks to the hidden ability of the star successor class, he can now read the memories stored inside stars once his sword level reaches 10. Those memories feel extremely vivid, almost as if the events truly happened to him. Serengeti explains that Wilhelm was not the type of person who spoke casually to others, so hearing that specific memory is enough proof for her. After thanking her for believing him, Serengeti asks if his changed appearance means he has become a sinner. He confirms that it does. She warns him that he must be careful of hunters, individuals who specialize in tracking down sinners. The protagonist reassures her that he is already aware of that danger. People who possess others' bodies while keeping memories from their previous lives are called sinners, and the NPCs who hunt them are known as hunters or reapers. After that, the protagonist moves to the main reason he wanted to speak with her. He asks Serengeti about the truth behind his death. He explains that on that day, he was certain he had killed the Demon King. He had driven the path of light into the Demon King's core, and the enemy's body had already begun collapsing. However, at the final moment, everything suddenly stopped. His consciousness faded immediately afterward, and he died without understanding what had happened. Looking directly at Serengeti, he asks her to reveal the truth about what really happened during his final moments. The protagonist begins reflecting on the Great Demon World expedition that had been led by Wilhelm in the past. It had been the first attempt to invade the Demon World and involve an unprecedented force of nearly 200,000 elite soldiers. Every participant carried strong ambition, hoping to become heroes of the first successful expedition into the Demon World. Because of this, the army's morale had reached extraordinary heights. The expedition had been carefully planned, using all the data humanity had gathered about the Demon World. Every possible variable had been considered, and the strategy had been designed with extreme precision. From a tactical perspective, everything had appeared flawless, leaving no room for mistakes. At least, that was what everyone had believed. The memory shifts back to the battlefield in the demon world. The land is covered with corpses, showing how devastating the battle had been. Serengeti is seen kneeling on the ground, completely exhausted and barely able to continue fighting. Several surviving soldiers speak to her, urging her to move forward even though they themselves can no longer continue. A mage explains that she will stay behind to cast a final blessing, even if doing so cost her life. A long-haired warrior admits that his body has already reached its limit and that Serengeti must advance without him. A badly wounded soldier, lying on the ground, urges her not to stop because there is no time left. Other heavily injured soldiers echo the same determination. They encourage her to fulfill the wish they had all carried for so long and insist that she continue forward while they remain behind to deal with whatever follows. Overwhelmed by the situation, Serengeti begins to cry. Inside her heart, she believes everything is already over. Even after sacrificing countless lives to reach this point, the expedition force had still failed to even approach the Demon King. Despite her despair, she forces herself to continue forward alone. Suddenly, the ground begins to shake as numerous zombie soldiers rise from beneath the earth. The battlefield quickly becomes filled with these undead creatures, and they begin advancing toward her while roaring aggressively. Accepting what she believes to be her inevitable death, Serengeti remains still as the monsters approach. In that moment, she reflects on the strange way the demons had fought throughout the war. Their attacks had always perfectly anticipated the expedition force's movements, as if the enemy already knew their plans. To Serengeti, the only explanation is that someone within their own army must have betrayed them and shared information with the demons. Because of this internal collapse, the entire expedition had slowly fallen apart from the inside. She begins to wonder if the mission had been impossible from the very beginning. Just as the zombie soldiers close in on her, a sudden and powerful attack strikes them. A massive explosion erupts, instantly destroying nearly half of the approaching undead. The one who appears is Wilhelm, the Night King. He arrives calmly and tells Serengeti to rest because the battle will soon end. Seeing him appear in that moment shocks her. Wilhelm immediately begins fighting the remaining zombies. As Serengeti watches him, she is reminded why he was known as the martial god. His strength was so overwhelming that even the demons seemed pitiful when facing him. His presence alone dominated the battlefield. Each swing of his sword carried incredible power, to the point that a single strike could reshape the surrounding terrain. The deep despair Serengeti had felt only moments before is completely cut away by Wilhelm's appearance and strength. With nothing more than his sword, he destroys the enemy forces that had nearly killed her. After eliminating all the remaining zombies, Wilhelm helps Serengeti stand and supports her while she walks. Serengeti tells him that she has already recovered enough strength and insists that he does not need to assist her anymore. Wilhelm dismisses her concern and explains that he is simply helping so she can regain some stamina, adding that she is still a valuable fighter. He then asks whether they are the only survivors left. Serengeti explains that aside from the wounded soldiers who had been sent back to the entrance of the demon world earlier, the rest of the expedition force had been completely annihilated. Wilhelm calmly accepts the situation and tells her that she must survive and return, at least. He reminds her that she used to cry every night during the expedition because she missed someone named Hudson and wanted to see him again. Embarrassed by this statement, Serengeti immediately denies that she had ever cried. Serengeti firmly tells Wilhelm that no matter what happens, she will return and meet Hudson again. At that moment, a mysterious portal suddenly opens beneath them. Serengeti is shocked by the sudden appearance of the trap. Wilhelm immediately reacts and pushes her away from the portal's range. While doing so, he briefly complains about how difficult the situation has become, comparing it to a challenging game. As Serengeti watches him, Wilhelm tells her that once she returns to the human world, she should simply live her life well. Whether she chooses to marry, fall in love, or do anything else, she should focus on living happily. Hearing this, Serengeti begins thinking about her situation. She realizes that she has been given a chance to survive, even though the expedition has completely failed. Wilhelm has saved her life and allowed her to escape the battlefield. Even if she returns alone, no one would blame her because the battle had been so brutal that survival itself would be considered a miracle. If she manages to escape, she will finally be able to reunite with Hudson and return to the peaceful life she longs for. However, just as she reaches that realization, she apologizes to Hudson in her heart. Instead of escaping, Serengeti activates a position swap ability, switching places with Wilhelm. She appears directly within the trap that had been meant for him and becomes caught by the Demon King's mechanism. Wilhelm is shocked by what she has done. The memory then shifts back to the present inside Serengeti's room. Serengeti explains to the protagonist that she was fortunate to survive the trap. Although she was caught by the Demon King's attack and lost both of her legs, her body did not completely disappear. The elixir Wilhelm had given her earlier allowed her to stay alive. Hearing this, the protagonist reflects on the past. At that time, he had been deeply immersed in the game and had acted without thinking too carefully. Because of that, the situation had unfolded in a very dramatic way within the game itself. Serengeti continues explaining what happened afterward. Wilhelm placed a powerful vanishing enchantment talisman on her body to hide her presence. Because of the talisman's effect, the Demon King was unable to sense her. As a result, she was able to remain hidden and observe everything that happened afterward until the very end. The protagonist says that he remembers events up to that point as well, but what he truly wants to know is what happened afterward. Serengeti understands his question and begins explaining the final moment. According to her, the Demon King soon revealed himself after that. Just as Wilhelm remembered, the Demon King did indeed fall after Wilhelm's attack. However, immediately afterward, something strange occurred. Wilhelm suddenly froze completely, as if time itself had stopped. The memory shifts once again to the battlefield in the demon world. The Demon King acknowledges Wilhelm's overwhelming strength. Even though Wilhelm possessed the power of a 5-star transcendent, he had managed to push the Demon King to the brink without relying on the authority of a goddess. However, the Demon King explains that this is also Wilhelm's weakness. Without divine authority granted by a goddess, Wilhelm could destroy the Demon King's physical body but could not completely eliminate his essence. Because of this, the Demon King declares that he intends to use Wilhelm's body as a new vessel to replace his own damaged one. Dark energy begins gathering around Wilhelm as the Demon King attempts to take control of his body. At that moment, a bright light suddenly appears within the swirling darkness. Seeing that light, Wilhelm recognizes it and realizes that it belongs to the goddess Pina. In anger, he accuses her of interfering and suggests that she might even be willing to sacrifice the life of the knight who followed her if it meant protecting her own star from being taken. As the dark energy continues to consume him, Wilhelm collapses under the pressure of the possession. The scene returns again to Serengeti's room. Serengeti explains that after witnessing that moment, her memory becomes unclear. She does not remember anything that happened after Wilhelm collapsed. The protagonist begins thinking about what this means. From what he has heard, the Demon King attempted to possess Wilhelm's body, but the goddess Pina also intervened at the same time. The exact outcome of that confrontation remains unclear, leaving him confused about what truly happened during his death. The scene then shifts to the castle wall of the knight's garden territory. 2 guards are standing watch on the wall during their shift. One of them complains about how boring the duty has been and mentions that they have been assigned guard duty far too often lately. The other guard explains that the territory's finances have become unstable. Because of this, wages for both knights and ordinary soldiers have been delayed. Many people have started leaving the territory, which has caused a shortage of personnel. As a result, the remaining soldiers are forced to work more shifts than usual. He also remarks that very few people would want to remain in a territory that appears to be declining. While they are talking, one of the guards suddenly stops speaking and stares into the distance. His companion asks why he suddenly went silent. The guard notices something unusual within the dusty winds approaching the city. As the dust clears slightly, he sees multiple glowing eyes moving within the storm. Realizing what he is looking at, the guard panics and raises the alarm. A monster wave is approaching, and the city is about to come under attack. A long time ago, the continent of Pangenia experienced a massive war between the forces of light and darkness. During that conflict, the goddess Leah lost her life. After her death, the continent gradually fell into deep darkness and chaos. Eventually, the land itself became divided. The continent split apart into separated regions, and the routes between them were blocked by a dangerous phenomenon known as the Dark Void. Because of this, travel between the divided lands became almost impossible. To solve this problem, people invested enormous amounts of money and effort into developing a special transportation method known as warp travel. Warps allowed people to move between distant continents by passing through the dark void. Over time, warp gates became an essential part of daily life for the people of Pangea. However, warps were also extremely dangerous. Since they passed through the dark void, any warp that was abandoned or not properly maintained could become unstable. When this happened, the warp could accidentally connect to the dark void itself and release dangerous creatures into the world, turning the warp into a disaster source. The scene shifts again to the castle walls of the Knight's Garden. A massive swarm of monsters is approaching the city. The creatures advance rapidly toward the castle as the guards prepare for the incoming attack. Meanwhile, inside Serengeti's room, the protagonist continues thinking about the information he has just learned. Based on Serengeti's account, he begins to form a theory about what truly happened during his death. It appears that the Demon King attempted to take control of Wilhelm's body after being defeated. At the same time, Pina, the twin goddess of the deceased goddess Leah, intervened in order to stop the Demon King's possession. This situation leaves the protagonist with more questions than answers. However, he begins organizing his thoughts to understand the larger situation. First, he considers the reason why he was unable to completely kill the Demon King. Right before the finishing blow, time suddenly stopped. From his perspective as the player controlling Wilhelm, that moment resembled a sudden blue screen, as if the game itself had frozen. However, Serengeti was able to witness everything that happened afterward. This means that characters inside the world were not affected by that time stop. From this, he suspects that the game might have been designed in a way that prevented ordinary users from defeating the Demon King. When a player reached that final moment, the system may have forced the game over, making it impossible for a normal user to destroy the Demon King's true essence. The Demon King had mentioned that only a specific type of existence could truly destroy his essence. The protagonist begins to wonder if that existence was not a normal user, but rather a player who had actually entered the world of the game itself. If that is the case, it might explain why he and others were transported into this world. Next, he thinks about the condition required to become a player. From what he has observed, it seems that when someone dies in the game, they can be summoned into this world as a player. However, Wilhelm's death was not the protagonist's first death in the game. Because of that, the most reasonable explanation might be that the transformation into a player only happens when the strongest character someone has raised dies. He recalls how he used to play the game. He preferred difficult, hardcore gameplay styles. Often, he would build up characters and, if they did not seem promising, he would abandon them and start over with a new one. Because of this habit, his strongest character had always been far more powerful than the others. That might be why the deaths of his weaker characters never triggered the same phenomenon. Although he cannot be completely certain about this theory, it seems to be the most likely explanation for now. Regardless, the situation has made one thing clear to him. He now knows what he must do next. First, he must identify and deal with the traitors who interfered with the Demon World expedition. The expedition army had been attacked repeatedly, as if the enemy already knew their plans and movements. That kind of accuracy would only be possible if someone from within the expedition had been secretly cooperating with the demons. At that moment, the protagonist recalls a memory from the past. In that memory, Hudson once mentioned that Serengeti had participated in the Demon World expedition led by the 8 heroes. According to the stories circulating afterward, the expedition ultimately failed because of internal conflict among those 8 heroes. This realization leads the protagonist to suspect that the traitors were likely among those very heroes, individuals whose actions he does not clearly remember. He becomes determined to track down every one of them and deal with them personally. The second objective becomes clear as well. Since the Demon King's true essence was never completely destroyed, there's a high chance that the Demon King is still alive somewhere. If the Demon King truly is the root cause behind the events that turn them into players, then destroying him completely may also bring an end to the entire situation. Just as he finishes organizing his thoughts, someone urgently knocks on the door. Hudson rushes into the room in a terrified state and quickly informs the protagonist that something extremely serious is happening. He reports that the city is under attack. The protagonist and Hudson immediately rush outside toward the city. When they arrive, they discover that large sections of the city are already burning. Chaos is spread throughout the streets as monsters rampage through the area. The warriors and soldiers stationed in the city attempt to fight back, but the monsters vastly outnumber them. Many defenders are being overwhelmed and killed as they struggle to protect the civilians. Isabella quickly analyzes the situation and explains that an invasion of this scale occurring directly inside the city most likely means that a monster wave has emerged from a nearby warp gate. Hearing this, the protagonist immediately realizes the cause of the disaster. Earlier, the noble Weiser had complained about the territory's financial problems. The protagonist now suspects that the man may have diverted funds that were supposed to be used for maintaining the warp gates. If the warp maintenance budget had truly been neglected, it would easily explain how a warp could have become unstable and released a monster wave directly into the city. At that moment, the Marquis Weiser himself arrives with a group of soldiers riding on horseback. They charge into battle and begin cutting down the monsters as they push forward through the burning streets. As the protagonist watches the noble fighting his way through the battlefield, he calls out to him. As the battle in the city intensifies, the Marquis notices the protagonist and immediately stops his horse. He seems surprised that Wilhelm's successor is still inside the city during such a dangerous situation. The protagonist quickly asks what exactly is happening. The Marquis explains that the city has already been heavily damaged by a monster wave. According to the information he has received, something has gone wrong with the 3 warp gates located in the east, west, and south of the territory. All of them appear to have malfunctioned at the same time. Hudson reacts with shock upon hearing that 3 warp gates failed simultaneously, realizing how abnormal and dangerous that situation is. Even the protagonist finds it difficult to believe. The Marquis then reluctantly asks the protagonist for help. Although he feels ashamed to ask, he admits that the city desperately needs assistance. If the Star Bearer fights alongside them, their chances of survival would increase significantly. At that moment, the protagonist receives several system notifications. A subquest appears, asking him to help defend the city. Completing it would grant honor points and a large amount of experience, while refusing it would cause him to lose honor. At the same time, a main quest activates. The objective is to stabilize the situation by shutting down the 3 overheated warp gates before powerful creatures from the abyss begin emerging from them. The quest includes a strict 30-minute time limit. The rewards will depend on how quickly the objective is completed, and clearing the mission fast enough could allow the player to access a special feature known as the Golden Scale Shop. However, the system also lists severe consequences if the time limit is exceeded. If 10 minutes pass, a powerful abyss creature known as the Black Flesh Hybrid will appear. If 20 minutes pass, an even stronger dragon flesh hybrid will emerge. If the full 30 minutes pass without success, a terrifying abyss ruler called the God's Flesh Hybrid will appear. After reading this information, the protagonist feels frustrated. In the middle of a citywide disaster, the system is suddenly throwing quests at him as if this were still a game scenario. Meanwhile, the Marquis continues pleading for help. With the current forces available in the city, he believes it is impossible to hold the monsters back for long. Hudson also begs the protagonist to help defend Serengeti's territory. However, Isabella warns Hudson not to make decisions based purely on emotion. The protagonist then analyzes the situation carefully. At the moment, the defenders are barely holding the line because only ordinary monsters are appearing. However, if 10 minutes pass and a hybrid monster emerges, the entire defense force will likely collapse instantly. Those creatures are far beyond the ability of anyone present to defeat. The only way to prevent that outcome is to destroy all 3 warp gates before 10 minutes pass. But achieving that objective would require fighting through a massive monster wave while simultaneously traveling to 3 different locations. The problem is that the city does not have enough available combat power. The ordinary soldiers are already busy defending civilians throughout the streets. That means only the Night Order, the protagonist, Hudson, and Isabella could attempt to break through the monster swarm and destroy the warp gates. From a strategic standpoint, the plan is extremely risky. The chances of success are very low. However, the protagonist also notices the special reward connected to the Golden Scale Shop. Although he does not fully understand it yet, he suspects that it may be connected to the Golden Scale fragment he currently possesses. Because of that possibility, ignoring the quest entirely may not be a good decision. Even so, the timing is terrible. He has had no preparation at all, and attempting a main quest under these circumstances seems irrational. The logical choice would simply be to leave the city and avoid risking his life for a nearly impossible mission. He reminds himself not to be influenced by sympathy. At that moment, the cries of civilians echo through the streets. Monsters continue rampaging through the city, killing people as they advance. Among the voices is the desperate cry of a small girl begging for help. The protagonist hears everything but forces himself to suppress his emotions. Soon afterward, a priest named Andrew appears while carrying an injured man. Seeing him in danger, the Marquis immediately orders the knights to charge forward and eliminate the monsters pursuing the priest. The knights obey the command and quickly intercept the monsters, cutting them down before they can reach the priest. The Marquis then urges Priest Andrew to mount a horse and retreat to safety. He explains that the city cannot possibly save everyone, and if they lose their only high-ranking priest, the situation will become completely hopeless. However, the priest refuses to abandon the wounded civilians. Before the argument can continue, a monster suddenly leaps toward the priest with its weapon raised. The Marquis panics, realizing the priest is about to be killed. At the last moment, Isabella intervenes. She strikes the monster with a powerful attack and slices it cleanly in two before it can reach the priest. Both the Marquis and the priest are shocked by the sudden rescue. The protagonist then approaches the group and calmly announces that the upcoming battle will be extremely dangerous. Anyone who wishes to withdraw is free to do so. Hudson immediately refuses to back down. He insists on helping defend Serengeti's territory. Isabella also responds with her usual blunt attitude, pointing out that their situation has never been comfortable since they began working together. The protagonist tells her to stop complaining and admits that this time he genuinely needs their help. Inside his mind, he acknowledges how absurd the quest truly is. No reasonable person would accept such a mission. Clearing it while protecting a half-destroyed city filled with vulnerable civilians should be impossible. He tells himself that the reason he accepted the quest is not because he feels pity for the dying citizens, not because he feels responsible for the city that suffered after joining the expedition, and not because he wants to repay the loyalty of those who sacrificed themselves for him. Instead, he claims the only reason he accepted the challenge is because he enjoys hardcore difficulty. Finally, standing before the advancing swarm of monsters, the protagonist addresses the defenders. He instructs everyone to prepare themselves, because from this moment onward, they will force their way through the monster wave and carve a path forward.